All right. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back to Deco Procedures slash deep diving class. Very exciting. We've definitely gone through a lot of stuff on day one so far. We've got a lot of stuff to go through tonight as well. And we'll have one more night to go through stuff as well. And before we dive on Saturday, Saturday we'll be planning on meeting at the Ryrie. I believe we said 11 or 11:30. I believe we said 11:30 if I remember correctly on that. But I'll definitely we can pop in and check on that real quick. Yep, we've said 11:30 on Saturday. The plan of action. What we're looking to do for the plan of action for Saturday will be three dives. And it sounds like Mike's on two different ones. So I'm going to go ahead and mute both. There we go. We'll go ahead and mute Mike on both of them. But the plan of action, we're going to do three dives as a team. I'll each pair you up in a group. It sounds like we're going to have a total of 5 divers. And we're going to have one instructor, one dive master as well. So through the process. So kind of heads up on diving with this type of diving. It's different than what you guys are accustomed to having done classes before. Here's how. At this point in the game, I really feel strongly that you guys are a more leveled, competent diver. So my job in these is to be your resident gremlin. I will present and create problems for you. They will all be controlled problems. I'll know what's happening. You may or may not know what's going to happen. I'll also ask you to do specific skills. We're going to go through those skills tonight, just to give you guys an idea of what I'm going to be looking for in terms of skill presentation on this as well. So it'll be pretty straightforward stuff. But I'm also, some of those skills will be problem skills. And so I won't necessarily tell you ahead of time what your problem's going to be. Dive 1, 70 feet. We're going to go out for about 20 minutes. We're going to accomplish a set of skills. Your guys' job is to stay together in buddy teams and as a buddy groups. Okay, so as we go through this, I will assign buddy teams the day of. After I've had a chance to fully review who's there, who's what, and what's going on. I've got a pretty good idea what that looks like, but I'll make my final decision on Saturday. Your job is stay with your buddy, and remember, there is nothing we do not do as a team. If your buddy needs help, help your buddy. This is not an individual sport, and so it will not be individual training either. So your job is to really be divers, and my job is to, if there's a problem, step in and help with the emergency and give you problems and task load you. So to prove that you can do it. So that's what I'm looking for. So dive 1, 20 minutes, 70 feet. We're gonna come back and I'm hoping we have some light problems I can talk about. From there, we're going to, after we talk about that, we're going to go out and we're going to do dive 2. Dive 2 will be to 90 feet. We're going to go out and basically the same thing. We're going to go out for about 20 minutes. We're going to come back. We're going to actually do our dive planning as part of this class, by the way, and we'll talk about that as well. And we're going to go out and do some skills and some challenges. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about those. And if I feel comfortable enough with you guys on dive 1 and dive 2, they progressively harder. Dive 3 will be to 110 feet. It should be pretty easy to get to 110 feet at the reservoir right now. Last time I looked, it was at like 90 something percent, and that was a few weeks ago. So I would imagine Ryrie has definitely come up quite a bit since then. So I'm just doing a quick Google search on Ryrie Reservoir, managing reservoir storage. See what Ryrie is right now at. Oh, it's not as high as I thought. Let's see. American Falls Palisades is at 97. Jackson Lake's at 79. That's weird. I would have thought a lot higher than that. Let's see. I'm not seeing Ryrie on here, but I'll find it. But anyway,
Ryrie's at 100%.
Right on. I'm just not seeing it on my little. There it is, right there, 100% full. It was right there in the middle, 100%. It's looking good. So that'll be great. That means it's not as far for us to climb down the daggum stinging stairs. So that's what we're gonna do. What are you questions on? What we're gonna do on Saturday?
Yeah, what intervals are we going to have between surface intervals?
We're gonna plan that out. But I would anticipate about an hour.
I kind of missed the beginning of this. Did you say we're going to the private slips at Juniper
Correct.
to dive?
Yep. We're going to do 3 dives, 70, 90, 110. We're going to do each dive for about 20 minutes. Some of us will be in side mount setup. That will be David, Benai, and Dustin. We'll both be in side mount setups. Dave, Mike, Matt, and Donnie, I'm asking to be in single tank back mount with a slung Deco bottle. So that'll be everybody has to carry at least 2 tanks, or has to carry 2 tanks to get through this class as well. So there's a few of us that if they do really, really well, exceptionally well, then we may be moving into Sunday for some more class. But if they don't, then we're just fun and experience dives on Sunday. So I'll be doing open water divers on Sunday. And so there's an opportunity after that to do more deep dives and more practice dives. I definitely encourage you to come along and dive it out. Right. So come geared for 3 full dives with slinging a Deco bottle as well. The Deco bottle can be 30 cubic feet or larger. I would not do over 50 cubic feet. That is a large Deco bottle, and that's a lot to carry. So just be aware with that. So that's what we're doing overall. We've got some presentations to go through today. Let's see. I believe, let's take a look here. Michael is talking about decompression sickness today. Matt is going to talk to us a little bit about Henry's Law. Let's see. And Dave is going to talk to us about equipment. So who would like to go first?
I would.
Okay. Easy enough.
All right. Death by PowerPoint. Sorry.
No worries. You've got the screen. Just share when you're ready.
Yep. Working on that.
And again, by the way, just a disclosure is we are being recorded. This will be on the internet tomorrow.
Let me know when you can see my screen. All right, cool. Mike, how you doing today?
Oh, I've had a little bit of a day, but not bad. Yourself?
Not too bad. The reason why I asked, I haven't talked to you today. I've talked to Matt, and I've talked to Benjamin a little bit. I haven't talked to you much.
Yeah. I had an interesting day. Got to spend a relaxing hour and change vacuuming out the pool at Dive Pirates. That's always fun.
Oh, that's amazing. It sounds like fun.
It reminds me of how poor a diver I really am.
Well, that's why we're in training, right?
Yep.
So I chose equipment today. I'm going to focus on 3 different areas. So we're going to end up talking about regulators, dry suit and wetsuit, the differences between them, the different types of regulators that are out there. And I will be asking questions as we go through, but those are the 3 areas we're going to hit. Like I said, we're going to talk about the different dry suits, the 2 different styles of wetsuits, like the semi-dry and the regular wetsuits, and the different styles of regulators like den, yoke. We're going to also talk about sealed, non-sealed, diaphragm, and piston, just to give a general overview of the regulators. And if you have any questions about them, about the regulators, you can always reach out to your local dive shop, and they'll be the most knowledgeable about what you should get in the area that you are diving in. So let's jump into regulators. According to Dan, and this is from the Dan website, the ones that do the insurance, piston regulators have a sliding metallic piston that moves to adapt to work of breathing, depth, and pressure in scuba. So kind of like a piston in an engine, it goes up and down. Same idea, except for you're not adding gasoline in it, but it allows the air to move through. Diaphragm regulators use a flexible element to adjust to work of breathing, depth and pressure in the scuba cylinder. So Matt, which one is better?
Both.
And why do you say that?
It's the what's the answer to everything, and it's always it depends.
Exactly. According to Dan, there is no which one is better. They actually recommended one to talk to your local scuba shop, and also pick the one that you like the most. They both have pluses and minuses, but they are both very reliable. very reliable regulators. So you're not going to have to worry about poor quality in that part. So do we go sealed or not sealed? So non-sealed regulators let the water into the first stage. Those are great for warm water or clean environments. What I mean by clean, like maybe not too salty, not too dirty. So you can maybe in like a crystal spring, you could something like that would be great in. Sealed regulators are typically used in cold or dirty water. So like salt water, something that has a lot of salt water in it. I know there's certain parts of the ocean where the salinity is a little bit higher. Very cold environments like ice diving. But again, you're going to want to, when you're ready to make a purchase on your regulators, you're definitely going to want to talk to your local dive shop and get their recommendations if they recommend sealed or non-sealed, depending on what your needs are. Let's see. Benjamin, what do you prefer in regulators? Do you prefer sealed or do you prefer non-sealed?
Well, of course, I'd prefer environmentally sealed because they don't let water get into the internal action, if you will, to allow it to freeze. And to back up a little bit, I also prefer a diaphragmatic regulator overall for the type of cold water diving we do. Diaphragmatic regulators tend to be more durable when it comes to extreme cold water. Interestingly enough, our friends at Dive Alaska, who dive extreme ice cold diving, prefer pistons. And while typically a diaphragmatic regulator is preferred for ice diving and cold water diving, they prefer the piston because they freeze up faster, but they also defrost a lot faster because of the mechanical action. So they're able to defrost the regulator much faster than they are a diaphragmatic regulator. So,
yeah, Benjamin, I appreciate you bringing up Dive Alaska, and that's the reason why I asked you that question. Teach Me to Dive YouTube has a great video on an interview from the guys from Dive Alaska, and you'll be able to hear more in detail of what they mean by regulators freezing and stuff like that because they're diving in glaciers. So if that's something you're interested in, go check that out at a later date. It's really cool. Dry suit. We're going to talk about dry suits now. There's three major styles of dry suits out, three typical dry suits out there, but there's actually a fourth one. And Aqualung makes it. It's from White's. It has a inner membrane, then it has like a skin that goes over. There's that one, and I know Benjamin uses that one and likes it a lot. But we're going to talk about trilaminate on this one. Trilaminate is three different materials that are compressed together. Some of the benefits of it is quick drying. And also with trilaminate, you can use it in warmer water. So like if you're in the Crystal Springs in, say, High Springs, Florida, as an example, it's 72 degrees water, you'll be able to maybe you'll be able to use it and not overheat based on your undergarments needs. Some of the downsides is that it's best to get it customized to you, custom built, just so that you don't have extra material. And that's what's nice about the Aqualung dry suit that Benjamin has, is it isn't custom, but it also allows it has like a range. And so if there's extra material, the outer skin kind of hugs it and it actually works really great. Now, Matt, what dry suit do you have? Do you have a trilaminate dry suit?
No, mine's crushed neoprene.
Right. And what do you like about your crushed neoprene so far?
Well, it keeps me warm. I'm still very new at dry suit diving, so I have no practical experience between any of the different types.
Right. Like the crushed neoprene is really cool. It's a DUI has one that's really neat, and I know other ones will have them as well, like Bear. But what's really cool about crushed neoprene is they start with like a thicker neoprene dry suit, like a material, and they sounds what it is. They crush it, so it's really small, and it keeps you warmer. It's typically stronger, easy to replace, but it does need some more weight. And if you're in warmer waters, you might get a little bit warmer than you'd prefer. To 20 years ago when I started using dry suits, you'd actually have like a 5 mil dry suit. It was literally 5 millimeter, just like your normal wetsuit, but it was a dry suit. And that was pretty heavy. We also have a rubber dry suit. They also call them vulcanized. And what that's for is more of your like diving, and like the commercial divers will use them for sewage, but they also will use them in your like city water tanks that hold the water. They'll wear those to go inside because it doesn't breathe very well. It traps everything so that you're not going to contaminate the water or contaminate yourself if you're having to heaven forbid dive in sewage. Mike,
Yes.
what's your favorite dry suit that I've talked about so far?
I don't really know. I having never been in a dry suit before, I have no way of passing an opinion on it.
Okay, fair enough. And when you're ready, you'd want to talk to your local dive shop, and I believe that would be Idaho Dive Pirates for you.
Yes, it would.
We all been in wetsuits. What's cool about wetsuits is they come in all shapes and sizes, and you typically won't break the bank with them. What they do is they warm up. They use your body temperature warms up the water around you, and that's how you stay warm. Where a dry suit warms up the air, and you have to use undergarments to be warm. The problem with wetsuits is the thicker the suit you get, it can restrict your water. It can restrict your movement in the water. So that's kind of one of the downside to it. Also, that they're really heavy, and in my opinion, they're not all that comfortable diving, especially like walk on top of the beach or whatever to get to the water. It's not very comfortable. We also have in the wetsuits, we have one that's called a semi-dry suit, and that has seals on it. What it does, it actually traps water in there, smallest amounts of water in there, and it does keep you warmer. It's for maybe going out into the Catalina Islands, as an example, would be a good place for it. Maybe on a little bit longer dives at a deeper depth might be a good use for it. But they're bulky and heavy. They're still cheaper than a dry suit, and they still have plenty of stock options, so you won't break the bank in buying a semi-dry suit. So I know I got kind of a little fast over regulators, dry suits, and wetsuits. We quickly talked about the different kinds of regulators. We talked about 3 different types of dry suits. I did mention a 4th one. And we did talk about wetsuits. Again, even though I talked about all these, you're still going to want to talk to your local dive professional, and talk to them about the needs that you have for the particular piece of equipment, because your needs will differ from my needs. Matt, do you have any questions for me?
None.
Mike, any questions?
Not that I can think of, no.
Alrighty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation and hand it back over to Benjamin.
Good job, guys. What do you think? How do you do?
I think you did fine.
Right on. Couple of points. There's a wide rainbow of types of dry suits out there, from tri-lam, hyper-compressed neoprene, bi-lam, quad-lam, vulcanized. There's each has a very different use and dynamic. I wear a bi-lam with a Kevlar shield, stretch shield that I really, really like. It's a nice, easy dry suit to dive. But thing about it, just be aware as you get in dry suits, all dry suits have problems at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And they will leak. And I had one of the worst dives I'd had. I had a crimp in my glove. I didn't realize it until I descended with it on Sunday, and ended up probably taking on about, oh gosh, I probably took on dang near a quarter gallon of water over the course of a 26-minute dive. It was a lot. It might have been that much, but it was. When it got to the point where it soaked my thick garments and my butt was wet, I was done. When my butt gets cold, I call my dive. So it definitely happens. One of the things to be aware of
for you on those.
Sure.
Because I don't know anything about dry suits. Do you use the same kind of BC with a dry suit that you do with a wetsuit, or is it something totally different?
No, that's a great question. Same BC.
Okay.
It just replaces, all it does is replace your wetsuit. Just be aware that the weighting requirements are definitely different. I went from a 200-gram undergarment, woolly undergarment, to a 500-gram undergarment this weekend, and it created the need for about 6 extra pounds. Seven, was it 7 or 6? 7. 7. I'd take that back because I added one in my belt and then 2 3s on my back to make sure that I was buoyant correctly. So you can add different levels and thicknesses of undergarments. Like it's like wearing a sweatsuit underneath that, and you get different thicknesses of sweatsuits for underneath your dry suit that help keep you warm. It's not the it helps keep a thicker pressure between you and the exterior water as well, so that you're able to retain heat and keep that farther away and more insulation. It's like insulation in your attic, right? The thicker the insulation, the more the higher the R value. So the thicker the undergarment, the higher the R value, right? That's kind of the thought process. Other cool things you can do with dry suits, you can add dry gloves as well. So I'll wear a fleece glove, and then I'll put a dry glove over top so my hand is dry. And as well, the problem I had was my glove got crimped as I put it in on the seal, and so it was just letting water through. And between your wrist and your dry suit, you put some sort of tube or break so the air can flow to your hand. And the problem was that as it crimped my glove, it flowed into my hand, through my tube, down my arm, and through into my dry suit and down my butt. So that was no fun. So it definitely happens. But as we start getting into tech diving, thermal consideration is a huge piece of this. You're going to be down for a lot longer, and what you'll find is, I mean, for example, Nikki and I were in Hawaii a month or two ago, and we were diving for 2.5 hours, getting these nice long dives in 76-degree water, and we started getting to the point where we were uncomfortable. It was cold. We were 5 mil wetsuits, hoods, and gloves, and boots, and neoprene socks. But at that point, we still got cold. And so as you start extending your dive, even if you're in 76-degree water, which sounds absolutely amazing, you will get cold. You'll see that most cave divers, very few cavers don't do it, wear a dry suit as well, because they're going to be in the cave for 3 to 4 hours. And typically caves flow at 72 to 74 degrees water. Typically 72 is the most common that you'll hear about. So wearing a dry suit definitely helps quite a bit. I know when I went and did my instructor trainer course for technical diving, I did it at Blue Grotto, and the constant temperature was 72 degrees, and I wore a 5 mil. My instructor wore a dry suit the whole time, and he says, "You're going to freeze." And I was good day 1. I was good day 2. Day 3, I started definitely feeling a little chilly and kind of wishing I'd brought a dry suit, but it is what it is. You have to remember as you go through this process that hypothermia is cumulative. It will definitely sneak up on you. It takes a few days for your body temperature to regain that lost warmth, whether you realize it or not. So a couple of interesting things to be aware of. Let's see. I'm just going to find where we were at in our process here, so we can continue on with where we were at. I accidentally scaled it too far along. There we go. So I'm going to go and share my screen and jump into this. I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on this because you guys should have a good understanding of this. But I definitely want you guys to go over it again and just refresh. Share screen. If you get into tech, I will go over this a little more in depth as well. So the physiology of the diver. So the objective is to find the ideas of what normoxic and hypoxic are and how they apply to the physiology. We're going to list 2 hazards related to the breathing higher concentrations of oxygen. List 7 major signs and symptoms of CNS, or central nervous system toxicity, and list the major signs and symptoms of pulmonary oxygen toxicity as well. So, overall, so the difference between hypoxic and normoxic. Who wants to? I mean, it's right there on the screen for you, but give me an idea of what. In fact, I'm going to turn this off. Stop sharing. What's the difference between hypoxic and normoxic? Mike, what's the difference between hypoxic and normoxic?
Hypoxic or hyperoxic?
Normoxic or hyperoxic?
Thank you. Hyper means you have a higher level of oxygen in your bloodstream, or you're breathing a higher oxygen concentration than normal, than the 21% atmospheric.
Okay. How about normoxic? What would be a definition of or normoxic gas?
Breathing less than 21%.
Well, normoxic, it'd be normal.
Oh,
Normoxic gases will be between 20 and 21%, describing a normal mixture of gas containing 21% oxygen. It can contain other things. It can certainly be 21% oxygen and 79% helium if you really wanted to, but it'd be a normoxic blend. It's something we could normally breathe on the surface. So typically when we're diving a normoxic blend. As we start moving into decompression blends, we're breathing a gosh, that's a hard one to say. Thank you, Mike, for correcting me on that. Hyperoxic gas. So hyperoxic gas is when we start getting into nitrox. And the problem with this is we know that we can start getting into toxicity, right? With this gas. So it's important to note that as we're breathing at 21% oxygen, that's the normal partial pressure or normoxic blend. Once we get to 0.6, that's the threshold for CNS toxicity. The lowest partial or the highest partial pressure or the first partial pressure point where CNS toxicity can start showing up. 1.4 is a partial pressure of oxygen is a recommended maximum partial pressure for diving. And at 1.6 or 160% oxygen, that's when the risk of CNS toxicity, oxygen toxicity, becomes the most prevalent and the most concerning for diving. So as we're building up and figuring out what our best blend for diving is going to be, we want to make sure we're staying below that 1.4. But I do know there's a fair amount of divers as they're putting together their best blend, they shoot for 1.1 instead. What's the challenge, Dave, when I'm starting to do deeper dives and I'm keeping my partial pressure blend at something like 1.1?
you're going to start. I think you're going to be dealing with nitrogen narcosis.
Exactly. So we're worried about the other side of the coin. The nitrogen in the gas that we're breathing is one of the two limiting factors to all dives. So we have to worry about the nitrogen load in the gas we're breathing. That's one of the two limiting factors. Another limiting factor is the overall dose. Just like I take aspirin, I take a dose of aspirin, the dose of oxygen that I'm taking on as well. But when it comes to my decompression times, that's nitrogen. When it comes to my time or my risk of nitrogen narcosis, that's nitrogen, right? So nitrogen is the biggest and most dangerous gas we're going to deal with for the most part. But we definitely need to take into consideration the idea of oxygen toxicity as well. Now, there's the other side of this as well. As we get to hypoxic blends, we have to realize that if we get down to 0.16, that's when we start getting lethargic. We get reduced mental processes. We start getting slowing down and having challenges. At 0.12, 12% oxygen, that's most likely going to cause unconsciousness. And finally, when we get down to 0.10, that's the minimum partial pressure of oxygen needed to sustain life. So it goes both ways. And as we start getting more complicated blends and we start moving past this course into our next course into extended range, we start worrying about it, start building blends that we'll be using at the bottom that will have a lot lower partial pressure of oxygen, so that we're able to breathe them more effectively at the deeper depth without getting oxygen toxicity. But for now, just be aware that is something that does happen overall. So oxygen toxicity, or otherwise known as the Paul Burt effect. Now, interesting, Paul Burt did quite a few different studies on how oxygen works. So he mostly discussed and understood and studied the ideas in the early 1900s. This is 1890s to 1900. He started understanding and studying the effects of toxicity and what it did to the brain. Now, Lorraine Smith is the one who started discussing and understanding, wait a minute, how does oxygen toxicity affect our pulmonary toxicity as well? So overall, oxygen toxicity is based upon exposure time, atmospheric pressure, and the fraction of breathed partial pressure of oxygen, determining the cumulative O2 dose leading to potential toxicity. Now, oxygen is toxic to the lungs when the partial pressure is greater than 0.6. Does that make sense, guys? At 0.6. So how deep do we need to be for the air we breathe to reach that 0.6 marker?
Around 60 feet.
Mike, how deep do I have to go to get to the partial pressure of 0.6?
I don't know.
So if we're at 21% of the surface and we know it at 2 atmospheres, which is 33 feet seawater, we're going to use all seawater through this project. We get to 42%. At 3, it's at 63%. So we start running into the risk at about how deep? About 60%.
I'm not following it. I'm confused because part of the deal was I thought 1.6 was our limit.
1.6 is the limit. Absolutely. And that's where we're most likely to start having a problem. But we can start gaining pulmonary toxicity, and that's pulmonary, where if we're exposed for too long at 0.6 over the course of an extended period of time, this is greater than 24 hours, that oxygen can become toxic in our pulmonary region. So if you have a long exposure at 0.6, it can actually become toxic to your pulmonary organs. Does that make sense? So at 60 feet for extremely prolonged period of time, oxygen can become toxic pulmonary. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
It takes a long time, absolutely. So toxicity generally occurs, though, when the atmospheric pressure is high. Anytime we break that 1.6 partial pressure of oxygen, the forced partial pressure for a short time, this exposure is referred to high pressure O2 poisoning, or the Paul Bert effect, and is toxic to the central nervous system. Central nervous system toxicity results in seizures followed by coma in most people within about 30 to 60 minutes. And seizures often can occur without warning or likely to be lethal. Other symptoms of oxygen toxicity are nausea, muscle twitching, dizziness, disturbance of vision, irritability, and disorientation. We like that, my disorientation throw in there. So I thought it was funny. You can laugh for extra credit if you like. Just know that divers are more likely to experience CNS toxicity due to exposure to higher than normal exposure of partial pressure after 1.6. So oxygen toxicity, where does it affect when we start getting into CNS toxicity? Where are some of the things that oxygen toxicity in the central nervous system would start affecting? Dave, what's something that would be affected in the central nervous system if we're getting into toxicity?
Your hands could be shaking.
Absolutely. Twitching, muscular twitching.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Matt, what do you think? Give me an idea of something that might happen with CNS toxicity.
Well, the first thing is, obviously, when we say central nervous system, typically that refers to the brain and the spinal cord. And so really anything that controls. Now, obviously, there's more to it than just that. One of the common things are more intense ones are convulsions. You can lose consciousness, and then there's a number of other things that can happen, like inability to think clearly, similar with gas narcosis. Good
job, Mike. What do you think? What's something else that might be affected with CNS toxicity? We're talking about the central nervous system.
As it starts, you probably would have the potential of getting numbness in your fingers and your extremity. Well, numbness everywhere for that matter. If it's affecting your central nervous system, it's affecting your nerves.
Absolutely. So, the one I didn't hear from anybody was vision. Vision's another one. Visual distortion, nausea, because of that, vertigo, dizziness, any of those things as well. Now, it's interesting enough. There's a video online by Jill Heinerth back in the early 90s. She was doing a partial pressure study, and now she was going the other way. She was pulling the partial pressure of oxygen down from 0.21 down to 0.2 or 0.12 to eventually she was trying to get to 0.1 so that they could see what that felt like, what that looked like, and did the diver have the ability to make the response time if they noticed there was an issue. Now, overall, I don't know if anybody actually watched that video or seen that video before, but it was interesting as they went through the process. The diver basically said he knew something was going on, but he wasn't able to make any changes to what was going on. He wasn't able to act or react. It happened so quickly that so subtly at first that he was not able to make any type of reaction to what was going on. So it's interesting to note that. So it's one of the important things that we need to make sure that whatever we're doing within this type of diving, that we're adding that additional safety margin. We're taking into account the safety limits and safety designs of what's going on. I'm going to go share my screen here. Let's see, add to stream. All right. So NOAA has a limit, National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency. They've got a basic idea of what the dose looks like. So as we start using a higher percentage of oxygen for either a bottom gas or a Deco blend, there is a limiting factor that they suggest for us overall. So for example, if we're going down and doing a 30-minute dive and we're doing a best blend at 1.4, our chart now shows us for a single duration dive, the maximum amount of time we can do that dive is 150 minutes, and we have a 24-hour limit of 180 minutes. So as we start building these dive plans and we start doing multiple dives on nitrox or using an accelerated decompression gas in our Deco cylinder, we need to make sure we're taking into account and monitoring the amount of time we're at the higher partial pressure of oxygen, so we can take that into account and put that as part of our plan overall. So making sure to take the account of the partial pressure of oxygen and the NOAA limits for that are going to be a huge factor in that. Now, this chart is in your My SSI app in the chart section as well. So you're able to look this up and as you're being able to do dive planning. Now, as we go through this process, though, we use this for dive planning. The nice thing is a strong dive computer such as the DSX or the Shearwater all have the ability. Let's see, let me go back over to my screen so you can see me. The DSX or the Shearwater or the Garmin, they will all take into account based upon your programming to the computer. So, for example, if you're running two gases, you need to make sure you program those gases correctly. Now, in recreational diving and nitrox, open water nitrox, that will definitely tell you that it's not as important to watch that. Let the computer do it. Or you can set your computer to air and dive a nitrox blend. At this point in the game, as you guys are moving to the more advanced placement in the diving wonder sphere, you're no longer at that point where you have the luxury of saying, oh, I'm going to dive 32% nitrox today, but I'm going to run it on an air table for a different additional safety margin. Because as we start extending our bottom times and extending that dosage of higher partial pressure of oxygen, we're getting a lot closer to those limits, and we need to make sure we're taking into account and we're watching that NOAA limit so that we're making sure that we don't over exceed the amount of dose. I mean, they say you're only supposed to take 4 aspirin a day or for this period of time. There's a reason for that. They very clearly said, okay, if you go over this limit, bad things will happen. We've studied this. We've put it together. Now, it's also worth noting that, Matt, how you process oxygen through your system at the point where you'll hit oxygen toxicity is different than yours, Mike, is different than Dave's, and is different than mine. I always like to go back to the medical paper about Sheck Exley that said Sheck was extremely nitrogen resistant. In all the studies they did on him, why was he able to do these 300-foot, 400-foot air dives and not have any problems and still have the ability to handle things. And the doctors determined him to be extremely nitrogen resistant. So it just goes to show you either they're really wrong and he was really, really, really good at being drunk, or we all process nitrogen and oxygen at different paces. So be aware of that. Make sure you're taking a look in your dive planning portion of it, any phase of a dive, that we're taking a look at what is the oxygen load and what dose am I going to uptake on this, and then make sure to account for that as part of your dive plan. Adding that as well, when you come up, take a look at your computer, because it'll give you credit for the time that you weren't at the high partial pressures of certain oxygens as well. Make sense, guys?
Yes.
Mike, tell me what I just said.
You said follow the tables. Make sure you refer to your charts and don't exceed what they tell you to do on the charts.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about. Make sure to take the time. So let's see.
But also let your computer tell you as well. Like, plan it out, but your computer will tell you, hey, you are this much percentage of the doses you're allowed to have for oxygen.
Absolutely.
Hey,
So
Benjamin, I have a question.
I have an answer.
When are the rest of us supposed to do our presentations? Do we do it throughout the night, or?
You bet. In about 15 minutes, I was going to go to presentation number 2.
Oh, okay.
You bet. I was going to break them up through the night and make you guys sit on pins and needles was my goal. Just kidding. I'm just going to break them up through the night so that I didn't have to talk the whole night. So, interesting enough, as we start talking about oxygen toxicity and CNS toxicity, the first one, let's talk about pulmonary toxicity. This is straight from the medical books. Chest X-rays may show an alveolar. There's no way to critically diagnose pulmonary toxicity. There may be mild effects, and they can change the vital air capacity, but there is no clinical way of diagnosing oxygen toxicity. Lung biopsy specimens may show change in consistency with O toxicity, but the primary value of the biopsy is only to exclude other causes of lung injuries. There's no way to specifically test for this. The absolute best way to determine this is how you feel. There are several ways to track developing pulmonary toxicity, but the most sensitive and accurate is the development of symptoms. A second technique is to monitor vital capacities overall, but there's no way to clinically diagnose oxygen toxicity. But as we start looking at this, oxygen toxicity, the easiest way to remember the signs and symptoms of it are convented. Convulsions, visual distortions, ears, hearing abnormalities, nausea, twitching muscles, irritability, dizziness. So as we look at this, I like to say this, and I've said this probably a million times, I'll say it a million times more. Diving is the most self-aware sport you will ever be a part of in your life. There is no other, I can't think of any other sport that's more self-aware. And I've done a lot of wild sports. I've skydived. I've done all kinds of other dumb things, downhill skiing. You know, there's a lot of things I can get away with in those sports that I can't get away in diving. If I get to the point where I'm starting to have convulsions or visual distortions, I'm having hearing abnormalities, or I'm feeling nauseous, twitching, irritability, it's definitely my body trying to tell me something that is going on that I need to be aware of. So as you start looking at this, make sure we're honest with this. The number one sign and symptom of any dive malady is denial. I like to jokingly say it's not just a river in Egypt anymore. It's the number one sign and symptom for a man having an issue. In fact, we were on a dive on Memorial Day weekend, and one of my divers was having a challenge with his dry suit. So we're diving along. We're on a deco stop. It's about a 10-minute deco stop. We're at the final deco stop, it was about 10 minutes, and his feet were straight up, kicking like Michael frickin' Phelps. He was hanging on to the biggest rock he could find, and I could see the gas pouring out of his regulator. I stepped back to watch what would happen because we were still safe. I knew what was going on, and we weren't actually in Deco. We had set the computers very, very conservatively so that they thought they were in Deco. If he'd popped to the surface, nothing would have happened. We were well below conservative standards. So I need to preface that with that, why I didn't step in. But his buddy went to him and gave him, "Hey, are you okay?" Right in front of his face. And dumb bunny looked over at him and said, "No, I'm okay. I'm good." He obviously wasn't okay. A second diver came to him. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay." I knew that he wasn't okay. I had a 60% blend of Deco gas on me. So I pulled my Deco gas. I went and stuck the regulator straight in his face to take this. "I know you're not okay. Take this." No, I'm okay. He had a progressive leak in his dry suit inflator that was causing that he couldn't catch and couldn't get a control over. Simple enough. If he'd held on with one hand and said, "Hey, I'm inflating," we could have disengaged that and allowed him to de-inflate. Another thing we could have done is we could have turned off that right tank so it couldn't have continued inflating. Another thing we could have done after that, we could have literally sat on him to help him stay negatively buoyant. A lot of things we could have done, but instead, dumb bunny, being a guy, wanted to. It's Aaron, by the way, and I give him a hard time about this all the time. He wanted to deny the problem, but the same thing happens. I mean, all of us have done this. Matt, I'd be willing to bet that there's been a time that you weren't feeling good. Your wife came to you and says, "What's going on? You feel okay?" And you're like, No, I'm fine. We all do it. I do it. You do it.
Oh, it's the burden of being a man, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we go through this process, you've got to be more honest than you're accustomed to being, right? And I'm not saying that any of us are lacking integrity. I'm not saying that at all. I take a great deal of pride in the level of integrity that I present with everything. But I will be the first to admit that there's been times I wasn't feeling good. I was upset. I was mad. And my wife came to me and said, "Are you okay?" "No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Give me a second. I'm fine." As I'm yelling at her, "I'm fine. It's okay." She's like, "Okay, whatever you want to believe." And she walks off, right? So with diving, please, please, please don't be that guy. Don't be that person. Be the person that's willing to admit shortcomings. You'll be a lot farther along the game. It'll definitely be to your advantage. So, Mike, which of these signs and symptoms do you think you'd notice in somebody else?
Which signs and symptoms? You going to give me choices, or I have to pull something out?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. There you go. Sorry about that. I forgot why I wasn't sharing my screen. You see my screen?
Yeah.
There we go.
Obviously, convulsions are going to jump right out at you if your buddy's going into convulsions.
I would hope you're not thinking he's breakdancing. Let's put some music on.
Yeah. Twitching is going to be pretty obvious. Facial muscle twitches. Well, maybe not pretty obvious, but somewhat obvious. The other things, maybe you'll get some clues that he has vertigo and maybe not. Nausea, unless it's severe to the point where he's thrown up, you're not going to probably know. Tunnel vision and ringing in the ears, obviously. If you ask him 10 times in a row if he's okay, you might find out if he's being irritable about it, but some people are just like that too. So
sure, absolutely. So definitely something to be aware of. Matt, what signs do you think you'd notice in yourself first?
Well, I've heard that the vision one is, well, it can be easier to detect, but you have what's called perceptual narrowing that happens, and so your vision could go, or could be worse, but because you're also not thinking straight, you may not always recognize it as an issue along with other ones. And so it's sometimes what some people say is, there's a problem when you can't really think straight. And so that could tip you off to that, hey, something else is happening. I need to kind of take stock of how I'm feeling in other parts of my body, and then, kind of go from there. But dizziness and vision are commonly experienced, even if you're not having central nervous toxicity.
Absolutely. So years ago, I went through a course called NATOPS, backseat jet when I was in the Marine Corps, Naval Aviation Training Operation Procedures. And one of the things they did, they put us all in a hyperbaric chamber, and they gave us all tasks. And the idea is, they put an oxygen mask around your neck. You had a helmet on, and you had to do certain tasks. You had to. Mine was to look at a card and name the card. Look at the card, name the card. Look at the card, name the card. Overall, so I had to keep doing this over and over and over again. Look at the card, name the card. The first thing, as I recall back, now I'll be the first to admit that in the video, you see me just kind of white out and go, two of clubs, two of clubs, two of clubs. My brain locks in the last thing. And the next thing I remember is the corpsman over top of me with the force of the oxygen mask yelling, Captain Hatfield, are you okay? Just yelling at me, right? Over and over and over again. And so I remember him holding that mask over. But as I recall back, I remember that everything seemed, my peripheral vision all seemed to come in very, very close. And all I could see was this. And the last thing that I noticed. So I do know that when I dive and I do these bigger dives, I make it a point and a habit of doing cognitive skills in my head on a regular basis. I'll do simple math of what's my gas time remaining. If I'm currently going at this pace, how much gas do I have? If I'm at this depth, how long is it going to take me to get the surface? If I have 10 minutes of deco time, 3 minutes of safety stop, and I'm at 100 feet, how long does that add up to? And so I'm constantly doing math in my head through the process as a cognitive way to check what's going on and can I think. I know for me, I had an opportunity where I had hypothermia. And when I got to the point where I couldn't calculate a 3-minute safety stop plus a 50-foot ascent to the surface and how long that would take me, I knew that I was in trouble. Absolutely. So I was able to cognizant get the idea of what that looked like. So as you guys go through this process and you start getting into deep diving, realize that nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, pulmonary oxygen toxicity, all these things, they don't walk up front of you and like your ex-wife slap you in the face and take all your money right then and there. And it's like an obvious thing, right? They're very, very subtle. They're very, very sneaky. It's more like a pickpocket. They'll take stuff from you and you don't quite realize what's going on until you go to pay the bill at the restaurant, and all of a sudden you have no money. It's a much more subtle thing. So be aware of that. Make sure you're checking, how you check in with yourself on a regular basis. Very, very self-aware sport. So please take the time to go through and be very, very self-aware of what's going on. All right. Let's see. Did we choose out somebody to do decompression sickness today?
Yeah, that'd be me.
That would be okay. Perfect time. Michael, are you ready to present decompression sickness?
I suppose. So technology is not really my friend, so you don't get any kind of charts or videos or slide presentations or anything else. I'm just going to go over this verbally with you guys. Most of the information that I'm going to be discussing is from Dan. It was written, an article that was written by Dr. Ed Thalman about decompression illness. Because we're discussing that, also DCI also takes in gas embolism, but we're not going to be discussing that because we're supposed to be discussing decompression sickness alone. So DCS, also called the Benz or Keyson's disease, is a result from inadequate decompression following exposure to increased pressure. In some cases, it's mild and it's not an immediate threat. In other cases, a serious injury occurs. The sooner the treatment of an injury begins, the better the chance is for a full recovery. During a dive, the body tissues absorb nitrogen and other inert gases from breathing gas in proportion to surrounding pressure. If the pressure is reduced too quickly, the nitrogen may come out of solution and form bubbles in the tissue and bloodstream. Bubbles may occur as a result of violating prescribed limits, but it can also happen even when following accepted guidelines. Bubbles forming in or near joints are presumed to be the cause of joint pain. When it's severe, it causes people to double over, which gave the name the bends. Spinal cord and brain are usually affected, causing numbness, paralysis, impaired coordination, disorders of higher cerebral function. If large numbers of bubbles enter the venous bloodstream, congestive symptoms in the lung and eventually circulatory shock can occur. 1968 research using Doppler ultrasound found microbubbles in arterial blood following a dive. These are called silent bubbles, also known as asymptomatic bubbles, and they appear in upwards of 60% of divers after multiple dives without any kind of symptoms at all of DCS. Further research has shown that the 15-foot safety stop seemed to reduce considerably the incidence of silent bubbles, and deeper stops, while still on a no Deco profile, reduce silent bubbles even more. Most divers don't have any kind of symptoms from silent bubbles, nothing that they really put their finger on. Sometimes they get flu-like symptoms and just really vague complaints. But it does indicate that decompression stress exists even before obvious joint pain or obvious neurological complications can occur. The most common manifestation of decompression sickness is joint pain and numbness or tingling. The next most common are muscular weakness and, oddly enough, the inability to empty a full bladder. Severe DCS is easy to identify because the signs and symptoms are apparent. However, most DCS will manifest itself subtly with a minor joint ache or an abnormal burning or tingling sensation in the extremity. Benjamin, have you ever suffered from DCS?
I have not.
I haven't talked to anybody directly that has, so I'm curious. Anybody here have dealt with it before?
I haven't dealt with it, but there's a YouTube channel called Divers Ready, and he got DCS. I think it was last year, and he explains what his symptoms were and what he felt.
Okay. I had a weird thing happen when I was at Blue Lake here back when we put Sponge Bob in the water. I ended up getting hooked up on sponge and couldn't get loose, and I ended up on the bottom much, much faster than I should have gone down. Not DCS sickness or decompression sickness, more compression sickness. I ended up with, I couldn't dive the next day. My ears were just plugged up tight. It was about a day and a half before my ears cleared to where I could even hear normally again. But that's the closest I've come to it. Anyway, signs and symptoms of DCS are unusual fatigue, skin itch, pain in joints or arms, legs, torsos, or muscles, dizziness or vertigo, ringing in the ears, starting to sound like oxygen toxicity here, numbness, tingling, and paralysis, shortness of breath. A blotchy rash is one that they show on here. Muscle weakness or paralysis, difficulty urinating, confusion, personality changes or bizarre behavior, amnesia, tremors, staggering, unconsciousness or collapse, and coughing, bloody, frothy sputum. Signs and symptoms usually appear within 15 minutes or up to 12 hours after surfacing. In severe cases, symptoms may appear before surfacing or immediately afterward. A delayed onset of symptoms is rare, but it can happen, especially if air travel follows diving. In many cases, these symptoms are ascribed to another cause, such as overexertion or heavy lifting or even a tight wetsuit. Sometimes these symptoms remain mild and resolve by themselves, but they may increase in severity until it's obvious something is wrong and help is needed. It gets back to what we were discussing earlier that Ben was talking about. Admit it when there's something wrong. You know, I made the comment the other day, he was talking about shortness of breath and and pain in the joints. And I said, well, yeah, I can run from here to the mailbox and I exhibit those symptoms. And it's true. I'm not a good runner anymore. It was a long time ago. But if I've been diving, I probably ought to pay close attention to that and realize that I may be having an issue coming up. Recreational divers should dive conservatively, whether they're using dive tables or computers. Experienced divers sometimes select a table depth rather than the actual depth of 10 feet deeper than what is called for by their procedure. This practice is recommended for all divers, especially when diving in cold water or under strenuous conditions. Divers should be cautious about approaching no decompression limits, especially when diving deeper than 100 feet. Flying or other exposure to altitude too soon after diving can increase the risk of decompression sickness. So if you're diving to 90 feet, do your calculations for 100 feet, and it gives you a little bit more safety margin there. If you're dealing with a diver, you don't have decompression sickness, but your dive partner or somebody in the group does. Have either of you two guys been through diver stress and rescue?
I have not, no.
Yes.
Okay, well, some of this is covered in diver stress and rescue. So if you've been through it, then it'd be a little bit of a review. So if possible, obtain and document the following information for all suspected cases of decompression illness. And this includes anything, arterial gas embolism or whatever. Record all dives, the depth, the time, the ascent rates, and the surface intervals, and the breathing gases used for 48 hours preceding the injury. Also note problems or symptoms at any time before, during, or after the dive. Symptom onset times and progression after surfacing from the last dive should be documented. All first aid measures that were taken, including if oxygen was administered, when was it administered, and what was the method that it was administered, and what was the effect on the symptoms. Record the results of an on-site neurological examination. I'm not going to include that in here because it takes too long, but if you go out to the DAN website, they have a list of tests that you can observe the person perform that indicates whether or not they've suffered from any kind of neurological injury as a result of DCS. It was quite interesting. All joint or other musculoskeletal pain, including location, intensity, changes with movement, or weight-bearing maneuvers, description and distribution of any rashes, any traumatic injuries before, during, or after the dive. The established treatment for DCS is recompression. However, that's not something that we can do. They highly recommend that you don't take them back down. There are situations where that could be indicated, but that's beyond the scope of any training I've had. It's essential a diver with severe DCS be stabilized and taken to at the nearest medical facility before being transferred to a decompression chamber. Early oxygen first aid is essential and may reduce symptoms, but this should not change the treatment plan of getting them to a medical facility and off to a decompression chamber. If you go through diver stress and rescue, part of what you learn when you go through that, or one of the classes that is dealt with in that, is administering oxygen. So if you have oxygen available, medical oxygen available, you can administer that to somebody that has DCS. Delays in seeking treatment elevate the risk of residual symptoms. Over time, the initially reversible damage could become permanent if it is not treated. After treatment, there may be residual symptoms. Soreness in and around affected joints is common and usually resolves in a few hours. If it was severe, there could be significant nerve damage. Follow-up treatments along with physical therapy help, but it's not unusual with severe DCS that you'll have permanent residual effects. Some of those effects include bladder dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, and muscular weakness. In some cases, a neurological DCS, there may be permanent damage to the spinal cord, which could cause other symptoms. Untreated joint pain that subsides could cause small areas of bone damage. And if this happens through repeated instances of DCS, there may be enough damage to cause the bone to become brittle or for the joints to collapse. There are 3 conditions of urgency involving DCS. And so the concept here is, am I back?
You're back.
Okay, thanks. I lost me there for a minute. I didn't know what was going on. This internet is so wonderful. So you want to make an initial evaluation of the dive site. You can suspect decompression illness if you notice any of the earlier mentioned signs or symptoms within 24 hours of surfacing from a dive. Sorry, I got to switch mice here. Running on 2 different machines. So the first condition is an emergency condition. Well, there's 3 categories of conditions depending on the symptoms: emergency condition, urgent condition, and timely condition. Emergency symptoms are severe and appear within an hour or so of surfacing. The diver may lose consciousness. Symptoms might progress and the diver is obviously ill. The diver may be profoundly dizzy or have trouble breathing. Neurological symptoms may manifest as altered consciousness, abnormal gait, or weakness. If necessary, if the diver's not breathing and has no pulse, begin CPR as immediately as possible. Take immediate action to have the diver evacuated. Check for foreign bodies in the airway. If they need ventilatory or cardiac resuscitation, the diver should be lying on their back. However, vomiting in this position is dangerous, so if that happens, turn the diver to the side until the airway is clear, and then resuscitation can resume. Use supplemental oxygen if possible. Urgent condition, the only noticeable symptom is severe pain that is unchanging or has progressed slowly over a few hours. The diver does not appear to be in distress except for the pain, and the neurological signs and symptoms are not evident without a careful history and examination. Sorry, I really haven't had anything to drink tonight. Administer 100% oxygen and give fluids by mouth. Do not attempt to treat the pain with analgesics until advised by medical personnel. Continue providing oxygen until arrival in medical treatment facility. And the last condition is timely. Symptoms are either not visible or have progressed slowly for several days. The main sign or symptoms are vague complaints of pain or an abnormal sensation, which could indicate something other than DCS. Obtain as complete a diving history as possible and do a neurological evaluation, and then go to the nearest medical facility for evaluation. And then, hold on. So that's pretty much what I have. Do we have any questions? Okay.
No, you were very thorough.
Well, it's a boring subject, and I'm not the most exciting person to be sitting here talking about it all. And I didn't know how to get any really cool videos up there of, airplanes doing spins or divers talking to mermaids or whatever. So you're stuck with it.
Overall,
Benjamin, I turn it back over to you.
You did good. So just a couple things to be aware of on DCS. DCS happens for one of 3 reasons. It's the terrible twos. You go down and you go too deep, you stay too long, or you ascend too fast. Simple enough. If you can avoid the terrible twos, too deep, too long, too fast, you're definitely going to avoid DCS. But as it starts to occur, DCS comes in 3 flavors basically. DCS level 1 is where the nitrogen is coming out, and it's small enough. It's past the point of being bubble seeds all to the next level, which is silent bubbles, up to the point where it's just past silent bubbles, but they're still small enough and still fine enough that it tries to escape, and it'll start trying to escape through the skin. It'll come out as called skin bends. It'll be a rash. So if you get a rash, there's a chance you might have the bends. And Mike had a good point that 60% of divers have been on multiple day dives have been measured to have some level of form of DCS. Level 2 of DCS is where the bubbles start getting larger and start becoming problematic. Now that comes in two forms, where they start getting trapped in the joints, or as these bubbles start going through the system. One of the things that happens is now that we've introduced something into the system that shouldn't be there, and the white blood cells come out and they say, "Wait a minute, there's something there that's not supposed to be," and they go to war. Same thing when you get sick, you have a virus in your system, and you feel sore and tired. It's because your white blood cells are having a battle. They're having their little war with something that's going on. So that's DCS level 2. Level 3 is a lot like AGE, arterial gas embolism. The bubbles get large enough that they start causing blockages and major problems. Major pain is certainly a portion of it, but you're getting blockages, and they're going to go up. They're going to block the blood flow into your arm, in your neck, through different portions of your brain as well. So you start having problems with that. The simple enough solution for this is, one, never recompress a diver who's become symptomatic underwater. You're introducing a whole nother set of problems that you don't want to be a part of. Second portion is lay them down immediately and treat them as if they're treat for shock. Monitor their ABCs, raise their legs, relax them, and get them well hydrated, and get them on O2 immediately. Period. No understatement. Part 3 of this is get them to a recompression chamber. Call for emergency help immediately. Waiting is not to your advantage. If you can get somebody to a recompression chamber within 4.5 hours, they have a 93% chance of a full recovery. So that's everything you need to know about bends really shortly. The next portion of that is going to be nitrogen narcosis. So nitrogen narcosis, the mistress of the deep, definitely something to be to worry about. I have a little nice little video that I like to share on this one. You may have seen this before, but it's definitely fun. I like to share it. I'm going to share it again.
One of the best things about diving is the effects of nitrogen narcosis. It's like being drunk underwater, but you don't get any of the hangover. Some divers get narked easier than others. It just depends on how deep you go and how susceptible you are to the calls of the nitrogen mistress. Now, as you all probably know, some people do pretty stupid stuff when drunk. All you have to do is visit your local drunk tank at the police station on a Friday night and ask what they're in for. Or if you're the one in the drunk tank, the cops will tell you why you're there in the following morning. But people do some stupid stuff when narked, and most people don't even know they're narked. So it can be useful for you to understand some telltale signs that your buddy is narked, so that you can be the designated diver and look after them and get them home safely. And such, hi, I'm Mark, and here are 5 ways to tell if your dive buddy is narked. They keep staring at themselves in your mask. You're effectively drugged by the gas that you are breathing the deeper you go, and such your inhibitions are lessened. And as we all know, we are all narcissists at heart when we lose our inhibitions, aren't we? No. Right. I mean, let's face it, I'll bet you anything that your social media picture is you scuba diving, isn't it? Narked men and women are like magpies, and they love shiny objects. And when they look at you, they're probably not actually looking and engaging with you. They're just looking at themselves or the mirror copy of themselves from the mirror dimension in the shiny lens of your mask. You find them buddy breathing with a fish. I've actually heard this a couple of times, and this is the other type of drunk, the considerate drunk. These narked individuals will be concerned at all of the fish in the water and their lack of breathing apparatus. After all, they've spent a lot of time learning how important their regulators are and to always keep breathing. So they'll often donate their regulator to these fish that, to be honest, they don't really need it. They wave back at fish. I don't do that normally. Hey, buddy. The third type of drunk is the happy drunk, who is observant and sees his crowds of fans in the fishes and all their little fins waving at them, so it would be rude not to wave back, right? Yeah, if your buddy is waving back at the fish, they're probably not. Or, way too young to be scuba diving. What are you looking at me? I'm not too young. Mental age. Fish are cool and they move their pectorals pretty much all the time, but while they are aware that you are there, I'm sorry, but they ain't waving at you. Documentary. Their mask fogs underwater and they spit in it. Much like people who defog the outside of their mask before a dive, you aren't going to get much benefit of spitting in your mask during the dive. I have seen this before and it was a dive guide, so I really hope he wasn't knocked at the time. I just figured he was showing off. Your mask fogs up and he spits in your mask. Yeah, enough said. Considerate of them, but just stay away from my mask. I can do it myself. At least it's spit. I could have passed him. It's so nice. He spits in his dry suit and breathes in his lungs. So what have you seen in the wild from the rare underwater species Homo narcosis? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Stay diving. We are an online dive store serving the UK.
There you go. Enough said about being narked, nitrous narcosis. Basically, the idea with nitrous narcosis is that it interrupts the brain cells and their ability to fire between one to another. Typically, what you see with nitrous narcosis is confusion, disorientation, some predisposing factors, how you could get nitrous narcosis. Very simple. Carbon dioxide buildup, not breathing enough, rapid descent, sudden pushing your brain into additional pressure that's not accustomed to, cold, certain drugs or medications, limited visibility to darkness, loss of orientation, high air consumption, inexperience at depths below 60 feet, task loading, lack of sleep, exertion, psychological outlook, expecting narcosis to be worse than it is, anxiety, time pressure, and fatigue. So those are some of the predetermining factors that will build up and cause nitrous narcosis more accurately. Now, if you notice in that list that I just kind of read off for you, that a lot of those are mental factors. If you think it's going to be bad, it's probably going to be bad. It's like Yoda said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So never thought you'd hear Yoda quoted in a dive class, but there you go. So overall, just be aware. So some of the signs and symptoms real quickly: feeling relaxation, lightheadedness, euphoria, slowed response, a feeling of well-being, increased judgmental error or giddiness, deterioration of fine dexterity, a fixation on an idea, time distortions, deterioration of multitask reasoning, numbness, tingling, sleepiness, inability to remember parts of the dive. I had an example of this. Was diving the Lady Luck in Florida. Nikki and I were kicking along on the deck doing this nice little Deco dive, and they had some recreational divers come down to see the deck. There is a 7-foot seahorse on the stern of this boat. Gold 7-foot seahorse. You come down the line right next to the seahorse, and then you go off to the deck and you see the sea life. These two divers were swimming around the seahorse. They must have swam around it for their full 20 minutes, and then they went ahead and ascended back to the surface. Nikki and I stayed for a little while longer and did our thing, and then finally headed up the line, decoed out, and popped the surface. I heard her ask her husband, "What did you think of the seahorse?" And he said, "What seahorse?" And she was very confused by this, by the way. And she said, the seahorse you were swimming around. He's like, "I didn't see a seahorse." And they swam around it for a good 20 minutes. I watched them for 20 minutes of dive. So didn't remember the dive. So something to definitely be aware of. Now, one of the things that we need to worry about as now soon to be newly minted Deco divers heading into the deep and depth is what is the nitrogen load that we're taking on. And we start looking at the equivalent narcotic depth. Now, the nice thing with this is we start looking at the equivalent narcotic depth. It's basically the same as the equivalent air depth that we learned in nitrox course, right? What are we actually diving? So if we dive a nitrox blend of whatever, we're actually able to dive deeper, and we use the equivalent air depth, which is shallower, right? So we're looking at the other side of that coin, and we're starting to talk about the equivalent narcotic depth. I'm going to present this to you, but realize this is a more advanced concept, and this is just to get your feet wet. I'm not expecting you guys to be proficient in equivalent narcotic depth. But here's how it works. To figure out what the narcotic equivalent is going to be at a certain depth is going to be figured out by figuring out the equivalent narcotic depth of the end. So, for example, if I did a 133-foot dive to 28 with 28% nitrox, what would that look like? What would the equivalent narcotic depth be to air? Here's how I figure that out. I'm going to use the forced partial pressure at 133 feet, or 5 atmospheres equals 3.6. So I'm at 3.6 atmospheres. How I got there? 0.28 minus 1 equals 0.72. That's what I'm looking for. What's my actual nitrogen load in the oxygen we're using? That's what that is. So if you look at that, 28% nitrox minus 1 tells me that I have 72% forced partial pressure of nitrogen. So I multiply 0.72 times the 5 atmospheres, which is 133 feet, equals 3.6. 3.6 divided by 0.79 is 4.56 minus my 1 equals 3.56. So my equivalent narcotic depth diving 28% nitrox at 133 feet is the same as diving 3.56 atmospheres. How deep is 3.56 atmospheres, guys? Who can give me that math? Matt, you're good at math.
Well, I can say it says right there, but basically you would take that and multiply it times the 33 foot representing 1, so you'd end up with 117 feet.
Exactly. So if I drove 28% nitrox, it's the same as diving 117 feet on air. Does that make sense, guys? So if you wanted to know how to reduce your nitrogen to feel safer level of diving, you can also add helium to that as well. And you can remove some of that nitrogen and replace it with helium. And how you do that is simply utilize this simple math formula below. But I want you guys to get the idea that at this point, we're worried more about the amount of nitrogen we're uptaking than anything. The second thing we're going to make sure we're watching is our oxygen toxicity. We're going to make sure we're staying within that level. But as we start out our dive, what's our equivalent depth of nitrogen that we're breathing? Are we breathing the same as what we were breathing before, or are we reducing that out? As we're starting to use a higher partial pressure of oxygen, a nitrox blend, we're reducing that nitrogen, giving us the same equivalent narcotic depth. Does that make sense, guys? Mike, did that make sense at all?
Yeah, more or less.
So we're looking at the other. I want you guys to start realizing, looking at the other side of the coin. That's mainly what I'm looking for here.
Hey, I have a side question for you.
I have a side answer. Let's do the match.
Since you brought up adding helium to the mix, how does that absorb or release from your system like nitrogen in comparison to nitrogen?
That is a great question. Nitrogen has a narcotic effect. Helium has no narcotic or toxic effect on the human body.
Right, but when you go to Deco, does it leave your body faster than nitrogen or slower? Does it change your Deco times?
It does change your Deco times, absolutely. It increases your Deco times because it allows nitrogen to flow faster into your tissues because it's lighter. So everything's flowing faster, so it increases your Deco time. Overall, it's roughly 1/4 the weight of oxygen. Let's see. The next thing I think we've really touched on hypothermia. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to skip over hypothermia. Let's see. All right. As we go through this process, the biggest thing I can tell you about, I'm going to switch that off, go back over to this. There we go. The biggest thing I tell you about decompression and technical diving, and we start getting into bigger dives, is it's a lot about the gear, but it's about the simplicity of the gear. The gear gets less complex and simpler overall through this process, with the idea that the simpler I can make something, the better off I'm going to be. And part of that is based upon the idea that as I'm going down, I'm going to be dealing with higher partial pressures of oxygen, higher partial pressures of nitrogen, higher partial pressures of everything. So we start getting into more physical challenges when it comes to the thought process than anything else. So overall, there's a couple different ways we can go in the technical range. The first one is looking at the buoyancy compensators. Now, typically we start getting into buoyancy compensators for deep diving and technical diving and deco diving. We start moving away from the jacket style BC because it's not designed for that. It's not designed for the utility that we specifically need to be able to handle things like the task loading with deco diving. Now, within decompression diving and technical diving, we start moving in one of two directions or both. I am certified to teach either direction of diving. The first one is on the left. That's called side mount diving. And the idea is we start taking multiple tanks, we move them to our sides. Great way of diving, less pressure on your back, a lot more comfortable dive, true redundancy, a lot of great advantages to do that. The other way we do this is we start going to what's called a back plate and wing. And the nice thing with a back plate and wing is one size actually does fit all because you can adjust it out to your specific dynamic and abilities for you. They'll generally always come with a crotch strap as well. As we look at this, we notice that there is a D-ring on the crotch. Who knows why we have a D-ring other than David?
DPVs.
DPVs is exactly right. That is a DPV strap. It is definitely a handy little clip for being able to clip things. When I walk out into the water a lot of times, if I'm doing a rocky shore dive, I have a clip that I use for my fins to carry them out there. I'll take one fin off the clip and I'll clip the fins to my crotch strap right there. And it's just handy as heck, but it's really not for anything other than for a DPV. Other things we have, if you notice on the left-hand and right-hand side of both of these, you start noticing that there's additional D-rings on the left and right side, as well as on the shoulder strap. Those D-rings are so that you can hang your makeup bag, your purse, anything. I'm just kidding. That's for things like Deco bottles, to be able to clip to additional bottles to you so that you're able to carry more gas with you, specifically more accurately for things like decompression gas. They tend to be a little bit better balanced as well than a jacket style BC. All of a sudden, you now have a platform. If you're doing a wing, a back plate and wing, now you have a platform against your back that will help balance that heavy tank load across. Where they really start to shine is when you start running two tanks on your back called twin sets. A lot of Americans call it doubles. I call them twin sets because that's what they call it in Europe, and it just annoys most technical divers. So if we can annoy the highfalutin guys who think they're all that in a bag of chips by calling it twin sets, even better, right? So that's why I call it twin sets. But overall, you'll start to find that the gear is reasonably simpler and designed more in line with utility versus comfort overall. So as we start looking through this, we want to make sure we're working at the dynamic of simplicity. Match the equipment to the dive objective. Make sure it's properly fitted so it's streamlined for you. And it's easy to use. So, Mike, should you get a brand new backplate and wing and suddenly throw a couple of tanks on the back and run out and jump in Ryrie, do a 110-foot dive?
Sure, why not?
That sounds like a brilliant idea. Absolutely. Something I generally discourage overall, and the reason being is we want to definitely make sure we're building up that muscle memory on where things are, how things work, where things go overall. So as we start looking through this process, ease of use is going to come through two things. A, simplicity of design of what we're using, and B, practice, 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 practice. The second part of that is consistency. As we do these things, change one thing at a time. David, you and I have had this conversation about when to change things and how to change things. Testing before critical dives and the team considerations. So as we start to build up this consistency, my suggestion to you is when you get new gear, get it streamlined and set for you, and then don't make a change for at least 20 dives. Figure out am I just uncomfortable with the rig because I've never used it? Am I uncomfortable for the rig because I've got bad position for me? Or am I uncomfortable in the rig because it actually is wrong? It's set up wrong. But the only way you're going to figure that out is through consistency, through practicing and changing one element at a time and making sure that we give it time to figure out what's wrong. Is it my brain? Is it my body? Or is it the equipment? And until we're able to determine that process, I encourage you strongly, don't make changes until we figure out where the problem lies. Because if the problem lies between your ears, it's a training issue and a practice issue. If the problem lies in your body, it's a mechanical issue. You need to figure out how to work it correctly. But if the problem lies in the gear, then absolutely you need to adjust it. Most likely, if you've set the gear up correctly, it's probably not in the gear. And being that there's three potentials there, and two of them are you, it's probably not the gear. Just a suggestion. So that is my suggestion for gear. The other thing is to be aware of as we start getting into this bigger diving, we want to make sure we're really getting into that reliability and redundancy of gear. So reliability, we use top quality gear. We make sure it's serviced regularly and make sure that we're familiar with it and it works. We don't go down to Walmart. I had a diver pop in the pool yesterday with some U.S. diver mask and snorkel and fins. She had a hell of a time clearing her mask.
Hell yes.
Process through the dive, through the first portion of the shallow. So finally I ended up handing her my mask and using my spare mask. And she says, "Oh my gosh, it's so much better." Well, that's what happens when you spend $100 on a mask versus $10 on a mask. You get a much nicer mask. So reliability and redundancy, making sure that we have good gear. Now, redundancy is a simple process. As we go through this, we want to make sure that we've got multiples of what we need. So, for example, I'm coming back to the computer, I promise. Let's see. Where is it? Put me back on the screen. There we go. So for my dive on Sunday and Saturday as well, the first thing that you guys and when I come out on Saturday, the first thing you guys will notice is I carry a primary torch. This is a 4200 lumen wrist-mounted torch that I keep on my wrist, so I have use of my hands. But what happens when this goes out? This one actually went out on me on Sunday. It went to emergency flashing mode where it was completely useless. Well, easy enough. I switch over to my number one backup, my redundant flashlight. What happens if this one goes out? I go to my secondary flashlight, secondary backup. In technical diving, you don't have the ability to just pop to the surface, grab something new, and run back down. It just doesn't work that way. So one is none. Two is one. So as we go through this process, I strongly encourage you guys that if we're in a situation where you're going to need a torch, carry at least two. You guys should all be coming out to the water with at least one SMB and a reel. If you don't, I'm going to have to turn you around and send you back up to the surface or back to the dive shop to buy one. But my encouragement is that you should be carrying two SMBs and at least two finger spools. I carry a finger spool and a reel and two SMBs when I dive. And here's why. I was on a dive in Florida. We were at about 150 feet, kicking along, doing our thing. And it was time to launch the SMB. I pulled my reel out a little bit. We were in a very strong, heavy current. It was about a 6-knot current, 5-knot current, very heavy current. I'd gotten to a rock, but I was a little bit out of breath and had been working pretty hard on this dive. Let a little too much line out on my SMB, and all of a sudden an errant current grabbed that line, whipped it around my wrist, and as the SMB went up, it was around my wrist and was dragging me to the surface. I went up about 20 feet. I reached over, grabbed my knife, cut the SMB away, and let that thing fly like a balloon on fire. It was no big deal. I cut it loose, but here's the problem. Now I'm down at the bottom, 150 feet. I need to launch an SMB. I just sent that one, goodbye. Hope I see you again. It's got my name on it, but so hopefully it comes home. What do? Well, easy enough. I reached in my pocket, grabbed my spare SMB, tied a new knot on my reel. Didn't make that same mistake twice. Let a lot less reel out, and then sent my SMB to the surface. So in a lot of these technical dives, especially if you're diving in the ocean in a drift, where you start can be up to a mile away from where you end. And that's a long distance for a dive boat to try and find you. So it's to your advantage to make sure that you have a secondary marking device, because coming back from the dive and not having to swim the 5 miles ashore is definitely probably something you'd like to do. Anybody want to swim 5 miles back to shore?
Nope.
That didn't sound like fun at all. I don't even, I do it, but that quarter-mile swim out and a quarter-mile swim back at Yellowstone is a lot. And you do that 3 times a weekend, you definitely, I'm sure I had to have lost a little bit of weight. So make sure that the gear you have is reliable, but redundant as well. So if you are going to try a new light, make sure you practice with it. Make sure it works. Try it in the pool first. You know, if it's got rechargeable batteries, make sure you're taking the time to clean the little O seals around it as well. Take that time. This was the first time my big blue light has gone out and not worked on me. So that was definitely something new. It works fine this morning, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I do know that I'm cleaning the O-rings and putting fresh O-rings on it. So it'll, if that's potentially the problem, I'll have that solved as well. But I generally tend to be pretty good about cleaning these things and making sure they're in good working order, putting fresh silicone lube on them as well. So the other thing to be aware of in terms of maintenance and redundancy and everything else is your cylinder must be capable of holding 50% more than the total amount you plan to consume based upon your dive depth, time, and sac rate. So as we start talking redundancy, make sure we're talking the amount of time that we're diving so that we have enough gas to be able to accomplish the dive, that I can get back safely and I can help my buddy. If I call the dive right now, I can get back to the and with my buddy if there's a problem. Now, as we go through this process and dive planning, what does that look like? Dave, what does that look like? If you and I are going diving, what does the dive planning look like now?
It's going to be looking like we're going to want to plan our emergency procedure or emergency contingency plan first, but we're going to be making sure that we have plenty of gas to do our whole dive, and that includes having a healthy reserve coming to the top.
Absolutely. But as we planning our gas, am I planning my gas and you planning your gas, or are we planning our gas at the same time?
We plan our own gas, but with a built-in emergency chunk.
To a certain degree, what we're doing is we're going to plan. If you and I are going out together, we're both going to plan our gas management, but we're going to plan it at the same time together so we can figure out who's going to be the controlling diver. Matt, in a situation, what does that mean? Who would be the controlling diver when it comes to gas?
It means who's the constraint as far as the amount of gas remaining. So if there's someone who breathes through far more gas, or maybe lost a lot through some free flow, or something happened. Anyway, they're the person who has less to breathe. They're the person who determines the length and the depth and all the considerations of the dive. And that's because that person needs to come up just as much as the person who has more breathable gas.
Absolutely. The weakest link in the chain. So if Dave and I are going diving together and I choose a 100 cubic foot tank and Dave chooses a 117 cubic foot tank, we know that my sac rate is about 6 liters per minute and Dave's is about 12 and a half to 13 liters per minute, just from past experience, which means even though he's got the bigger tank, I have a lot higher sac rate, or a lot lower sac rate than he does. I'm going to go through substantially less gas than he does. But I also need to take that into consideration as I'm building my dive plan. We get to an emergency point, what point will I need to stop and turn around because I don't have enough gas to get him and me back to the surface? So as I do my dive plan, I have to know what his sac rate is and his gas management plan is, because I need to make sure I've got enough gas to get him back to the surface as well. And same thing with him. He has to realize and look at my gas management plan and make sure that his point in the dive, where his point in the dive is, to make sure to be able to get me back. What happens if I have a catastrophic gas failure on both my tanks and I've got no gas to get back? we've got to make sure that each of us has enough gas and what that point is. And what we do is who's ever is first. If Dave's point to get us both back to the surface safely with all deco stops involved is at 20 minutes and mine's at 25 minutes, we're going to go with the 20 minutes. We're turning at 20 minutes because we do our gas plans separately but together. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're both able to take the other one back to the surface safely. And the controlling diver is going to be the one that has to turn first, the least common denominator, the weakest link in our little chain. So gas management is a whole new thing for you guys. At this point, as open circuit divers doing recreational diving, you guys have been at the point of, I've got a tank, I jump off the boat, and I'm going to go see some pretty fish. And somewhere around 900 PSI, I'm going to head to the surface. Or 50 minutes, because the dive master said I need to turn at 50 minutes. So all of a sudden, we're in a different dynamic. We're advanced divers. We're moving to the process of figuring out, wait a minute, I am no longer alone. I now have a attached pony bottle that has feelings and sometimes lipstick. And I need to take that into account. Now, unfortunately, none of the divers this weekend have lipstick, and I don't know if my wife will be diving with us or not. I think she's just doing the morning dives with the open waters. I don't think she's doing the deco dives. But
I may wear lipstick.
Okay, just it's good to know.
Yeah.
I've got some cherry chapstick here too. It's actually got cherries, just Burt's Bees, but whatever. But just realize that now we're having to take that into consideration of what does our gas management plan look like together and separate, and who's going to control the dive. Just because I go through less gas, maybe I've got a smaller tank because I have a better sac rate. I need to be cognizant of that and know at what point do I need to turn the dive so that I can still get myself and Dave back. Make sense, guys?
I have a question.
Sure.
Because, yeah, my sac rate's like 13 liters, like we talked about. Is it beneficial to add a couple liters per minute into your dive plan just in case you are working a little bit harder than normal? So maybe instead of me planning for, at 13 liters, maybe I plan for 16 liters.
Within reason. Certainly you don't want to go overboard because you kill the dive. You should be, but you should be planning based upon rule of thirds. And which means a third out, a third back, and a third reserve. So we still have a healthy reserve even above and beyond that already. So it's definitely never a bad idea. And when I do my gas management plans for myself, I use 10 to 12 liters per minute as my gas management plan because that's a reasonable gas plan. But I also know that when I get to my Zen point and my Zen place, for me, that my sac rate is typically 5.5 to 6 liters per minute, which is very low. I get that. But I generally plan a more reasonable sac rate based upon the persons around me. So a little safety goes a long way. One of the things you guys will find out with me is that, yes, my mug says go do dangerous shit. I get that. And I'm all about doing high risk stuff, but you'll also find out very quickly that I work very hard to mitigate all risk involved. I never jump out of a plane without a secondary chute and an automatic deployment device. I never do a dive that I don't have a contingency plan on as well so that I'm ready to go. And if I do deco dives, I do them within a very strict regimen of safety as well. So safety is to your advantage. Absolutely. So let's talk about tanks. Are all tanks created equal?
No.
No? How so?
Some hold very small amounts, down, and we'll just throw out a number, let's say 13 cubic feet. And some tanks hold, 117 cubic feet.
Okay. That's absolutely true. So overall, I'm going to switch back over to sharing my screen. So different tanks definitely hold different capacities. The two main types of tanks we generally work with are three types, I should say. I'm sorry. Low capacity, normal capacity, and high capacity or high pressure. Low pressure, normal pressure, and high pressure as we look at these. And then within these, there's different types of mixtures as well. Let's see, figure out where I'm at. So how much pressure does not mean how much air is in the tank. We just have to understand the gas capacity, and how do we figure that out? Which Michael, by the way, very, very aptly and very cleverly pointed out the other day when we were figuring out sac rate, is that different sizes will hold different amounts of gas. So the easiest way to understand this and the gas capacity of a tank is to look at it in liters and bar. I get it. Nobody wants to deal with metric. It's that weird European thing that every other country except us in the world uses because they're all wrong and we're of course right. Isn't that about right? Is that how it works?
Well, in the early 90s, we tried to go to metric.
Well, yeah, we tried to agree with the rest of the world, and then we decided we were still right, and everybody else in the world was wrong. And we decided that our way must be the right way. That's pretty much US. It's okay. It's okay to admit that we're perfect and everybody else is screwed up. I'm cool with that. So we understand the easiest way to understand this is understanding what the size of the tank is in liters and bar, because with that we can come up with a total liters of gas in the tank. Now, quick question for you guys. Safety reserve calculations. Which one would we rather use, 50 bar or 500 PSI? Is this the amount of gas? Is this amount of gas the same in every tank as well?
500 PSI is the same as around 35 bar. And so the numbers are not the same.
I like that you went back in that direction. So 50 bar is about 750 PSI, whereas 500 PSI. So why do you think we use those two numbers, 50 bar or 500 PSI?
It's easy to remember and easy to just quickly look at.
Now, interestingly enough, is this amount of gas the same in every tank?
No.
Why?
Because a low pressure tank is the pressure is going to be lower. On a high pressure tank, the pressure is going to be higher. So you might be, say, you might have more gas, say on an HP tank, even at 500 PSI.
Absolutely. So more capacity. So a bigger tank has more capacity. And so with more capacity, that pressure point would be different, right? Easy enough. So as we start looking, my personal favorite, I like Faber tanks. I do not sell Faber tanks, and I make no money from this promotion. This is not a paid endorsement, but typically you'll see me using Faber tanks. And it's interesting to kind of look at this as we look at them. This is all public information. An 80 cubic foot tank, HP tank, is 3,442 PSI or 237 bar overall. And it's 11.1 liters, or I'm sorry, 10.1 liters. So the easiest way to figure out the total amount of capacity of this tank is we simply multiply that 10.2 liters by 237 bar equals 237 times 10.2. Tells me that in this 80 cubic foot tank, we have 2,417 liters of gas. Just for comparison's sake, if we went over to this 133 cubic foot tank, and good luck and good God if you carry a 133, because that's a heavy dang tank. That is a lot of freaking tank to carry. That is for sure. Yeah, there it is, 42 pounds. Oh, damn near double the 80 cubic foot tank, 42.4 pounds. So 17 liters of gas times 237 bar equals 4,029 liters. There's your difference. About 1,600 liters of gas difference between the 80 cubic foot tank and the 133 cubic foot tank. Now we start using our basic math, and I know that I use about 6 liters per minute at the surface of SAC. Overall, that's a lot of gas. That's a considerable amount of gas to go through the process. So it's handy to know how much capacity your tank has and being able to multiply that into bar. So other things to think about tanks. What are your NDL limits? What are the physical sizes of the tanks? What type of diving are you do? Side mount, back mount, I'm sorry, single mount, back mount, or side mount. I was reading that as side mount, back mount, or side mount. I really like side mount apparently. But what are we doing with that? So, for example, if you're diving a 133, that's a very big, heavy tank to put on your back, and it's a lot to balance out overall. Are you diving twin sets in back mount? Or if you're diving side mount? And I can tell you that 133 would be a horrible tank to dive in side mount. The best tank in this field of view for side mount is this 100. It trims very, very nicely. It's got a plenty amount of gas in it, and it holds very nicely. In twin sets, a twin 80 or twin hundreds is about as big as you want to get, because that becomes a lot of weight. If you're running twin sets, you're in a twin hundreds, you're talking 17 pounds of weight on your back, plus back plate, plus wing. In HPs, you're looking at 16 pounds. So not a huge amount of difference for 20 extra cubic feet of gas, or about another 700 liters of gas. 1,400 liters of gas. So making sure we understand what we're using the specific tank for, and where we're going to put it and how we're going to carry it is definitely to your advantage.
Then
right?
there's also the consideration that if they're twins, the HP 100, it showed that it was 34 pounds, so dry, which now means that you're going to be carrying 68 pounds plus the weight of the two valves on your back, in addition to whatever other buoyancy weights you need.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, lugging around 68 pounds on your back is not exactly an easy thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. I do it all the time. I have a set of twins in 100s, and it's a lot of weight to throw on your back and hike down a damn hill or hike up a hill. That is for sure. So
or just turn it to your truck.
But the problem is I can't always park as close to the water as I would like. The other fun thing about trying to dive heavy steels in the water is make sure you have to understand what's your surface swim. So last weekend when I did my surface swim in twin set 100 LPs or HPs, the problem with my HPs is they want to lay flat. I've got them trimmed to lay perfectly flat. So either I lay flat on my back with my head in the water, or I lay flat on my face. There's no 45-degree angle paddling backwards in the water with that very easily. It's a lot of freaking work. So understand what you're using these for. What kind of dive are you getting ready to do? What's the weight of this? So definitely to your advantage to understand. So determine the actual volume of the tank. We just talked about this. It's pretty straightforward. We look up and find out what the total liters of the tank are, multiply it by bar, and that's the total liters of gas. If we cannot figure out what the bar is, or we're not accustomed to that, simply multiply PSI times 0.06894, and that gives us the bar. So for example, 117 cubic foot tank is 15 liters. The working pressure is 3442. Multiply that by 0.06894 gives us 237 bar. 15 liters by 237 bar equals 3,555 liters of total gas, which means on a one-way, on using rule of thirds, that gives us 1,185 liters of usable gas on a one-way trip, gives us 1,185 liters of gas for our way back, and 1,185 liters of gas for our reserve. Now, interestingly enough, if we're trying to figure out, if we say, oh, wait a minute, what if I had an 80 cubic foot tank and I said I wanted to end at 500 PSI? How many liters of gas is that? Well, it's 500 times 0.06894 equals 34 bar times 10.2 equals 351 liters. So as you can see, if we had an 80 cubic foot tank and we're used to ending and adding to the surface, we're ending and arriving at the surface with about 351 liters of gas left in our tank. In technical diving, in this particular case, using a 117, we're ending our dive with 1,185 liters of additional gas, or roughly 3 times more gas of safety margin than what we do in recreational diving. So one of the next secrets of technical diving is making sure we add safety margin to everything we do. It's to your advantage. Now, pony cylinders, stage cylinders, how are they used? Selection criteria, simple enough. Typically, If you're using a jacket style buoyancy compensator, you're going to clip it on your left-hand side. Okay. On Saturday, I'm going to show you how to fix this to your side very easily, and how to rig a pony bottle. But it's pretty straightforward on how you set it. You're going to make sure that the clips are off the right-hand side at the 3 o'clock position, and they're going to clip to the top D-ring and to a lower D-ring. Okay. If you're using a backplate and wing, if you're using a more or a jacket style BC, if you're using a backplate and wing, simply enough, you're already set up. Top D-ring, lower D-ring. That's where they're going to clip to. If you're using a side mount setup, they're going to clip to your left-hand side on the top D-ring and the left D-ring, or onto the stage bottle point on your left-hand side. Anybody know some consistent or anything that was kind of similar between all three of those places? Mike, what did you notice what was the same about all three of those setups?
They all go in the same place.
They all go in the same place. Consistency, right? So you're a police officer, Dave or Michael. How important was it for all the police officers to be fairly consistent in their setup?
You mean consistent for the officer all the time, or for each officer to be the same?
For each officer to be the same.
It depends. We didn't really stress that a lot where I was at. You had left-handed shooters, you had right-handed shooters. We had some variation in what we were allowed to use for firearms. So I carried one gun, another guy carried a Glock. But overall, the equipment's all the same. I'm not going to have to take my officer's pistol from him. What I need to know is how to get him out of a firefight, or how to get him out of the heat if he goes down.
How about things like a 2-point or a 2-stage holster where I can't just pull it out unless I do something first?
Nah, we didn't have one type.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Nope. I carried a triple threat holster. Some of the guys carried in a double. We didn't let anybody carry it in a duty holster that was just a single point retention. We always had double retention or triple retention, but they didn't all work the same depending on what you were carrying. So sorry, that one didn't work.
Yeah, well, there actually are in law enforcement. There are some things that they're not highly standardized, but a similar idea is making sure that an officer is consistent in their training and how they orient their handgun versus their taser, because unfortunately there are stories of officers in the heat of the moment intending to deploy their taser using their pistol, and that is often
and most agencies make you carry something like a taser on the off gun side,
right? And that's
although depending on the agency, some allow you to carry it in a butt forward configuration, so you still grip it with whatever your shooting hand is. Others make you carry it in the opposite side, so that you have to use your opposite hand to draw it. A lot of that depends on the agency too. So,
gotcha.
To Ben's point though, is that the reason why you put the stage bottle always on the left-hand side is that in an emergency, we need to exactly know where our buddy's equipment is because of muscle memory.
So as we move through this process, absolutely. So we're going to start building in and doing things the same way. Our first Deco bottle and stage bottle slash pony bottle are always going to start on our left-hand side. That's going to be our leanest and lowest mix first, right? And here's how it's going to look. We're going to set our regulator up, and we're going to start with putting a Jubilee band or a compression band on the lower portion. As you can see, here's the handle off to the left-hand side, directly at the 3 o'clock position, with the handle being at the 9 o'clock position. Then we're going to put our double clips. Now, as we set up our stage bottle, it's got to have several key components. Michael, what's one thing that every stage bottle, Deco bottle, and pony bottle must have?
Well, it's got to have a regulator.
Absolutely. Got to be able to breathe on it. It's absolutely really. Matt, what's one thing that a stage bottle that has to have that's not a regulator?
Well, there's the four things. Like there's the first and second stages, like you said right there, and then there's the high pressure hose and SPG, so you can tell what.
Yeah, so it's got to have a first stage, a second stage, an SPG, and a way of attaching it. Simple enough. It has to have at least one SPG, has to have at least one second stage and one first stage on every tank, and a way to clip it off to you to hold it to you. Because carrying this thing through the water off by the handle is not going to work for you. So it has to have those key pieces on it as well. So let's talk about how to use this. So as we get ready to use our stage bottle, our Deco bottle, or our pony bottle, the first thing we want to do is we're going to check it at the surface. We're going to pull it out. We're going to pull our hose. We're going to make sure that everything operates correctly. We're going to try and breathe on it before we pressurize it. We're going to check to make sure all the fittings are correct. We're going to check to make sure that our hoses are able to be stowed away in such a way that they won't be in our way. We're going to check to make sure our compression band or our Jubilee band is tight so that it's not going to come loose. We're also going to check to make sure it fits correctly, that it's going to fit comfortably in the dive. Nobody wants to walk around and do a 20-mile hike with a thorn in your shoe. Likewise, you want to make sure that that pony bottle fits correctly and feels comfortable. And the last thing we're going to do is after we've checked all that, we've checked the regulator, make sure it doesn't breathe when it's on, we're going to go ahead and charge the cylinder. We're going to breathe on it and make sure it actually works. Now, question for you guys, other than Dave. Mike, I charge a cylinder. Do I leave it charged throughout the whole dive or do I turn it off?
I don't know.
Matt, what do you think?
Well, you do turn off the valves if it's a stage one, but you leave a slight amount pressurized in the line.
So you charge it and then turn it off.
Correct.
Exactly. Now, Dave, why would I charge it and then turn it off?
Yeah, so when you charge it, you're going to test to make sure it's working, and they're going to turn it off. And the reason why you want to, leave it charged is so that in an emergency, you at least have a couple breaths before you turn it back on.
Absolutely. But we're also protecting the regulator.
Mm-hmm.
We're we should have a breath, but that's not the most important thing. We're charging it to keep the regulator and the first stage protected so water can't backwash into there and ruin our regulator, our first stage. The other thing we want to do is we're turning it off so that we don't lose gas, because the last thing you want to happen, and I can tell you, interestingly enough, I have one of my 2O bottles had a bad valve. I didn't know it. Showed up at React Right course. I think, Mike, you were there, if I remember right. Go to check my O bottle, and it's empty. The last thing you want to do is show up in an emergency with a bottle that you're supposed to use for an emergency and have nothing in it. So the easy way to make sure we do that is we're going to charge it, we're going to test it, charge it, test it, turn off the bottle, and make sure that it's charged to pressure so that as we go through the dive, it cannot leak. So that when we're ready for it, we know that there's going to be the amount of gas that we expect in that tank. Regulators leak a little bit sometimes. They'll bubble. We won't even realize it, especially if it's under our arm. We may or may not realize that. What it does is it reduces the amount of failure points in the process. So simple enough as once we get down to that point, we're diving along and we need it. Emergency comes along. We just have to remember to reach over, take that left hand, turn it back on, pull it in, and put it in our mouth. Stay calm. Once we get to our deco point, and that's where we're going to use it, simple enough. And by the way, this is going to be one of the skills is I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and deco switch. That's the symbol. This means switch. This means deco. Can you guys see me?
Not so much. It's going across kind of grainy.
We'll give it a second to catch up.
Oh no, I could see it. It's just that the resolution is low, and so it's.
Gotcha. Sorry about that.
It looks more like a paw instead of a hand.
Gotcha. So the pinky in a curved position, facing towards your buddy. Can you see that?
Yep.
Mike,
Okay.
can you see that?
Got it.
Got it. That means Deco. 2 fingers spread apart, flipped over to top, back and forth. That means switch. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to go down to our depth. We're going to do some skills, and we're going to come back up to our Deco stop. At our Deco stop of 21 feet, we're going to stop, and I'm going to tell you to Deco switch. Now, there's a process in this, and it's a pretty simple process, easy process. There is an acronym. The acronym sucks. I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm not a fan of the switch acronym. I think it's a little more complicated than it needs to be. Here's what I want you guys to do. You guys are in buddy pairs, right? What you're simply going to do is on your bottle, it will be marked just like you've learned in nitrox. You're going to unclip the lower portion of your bottle. You're going to look at the bottle, and you're going to look at the mod, the maximum operating depth that you have marked on that nitrox bottle per your nitrox course that you learned in. Once you look at the mod, then you're going to look at your computer and check the depth and make sure that you are above the maximum operating depth for that bottle. With me so far? This is before you breathe on it. You're going to look at your buddy, Mike. Am I okay to switch to Deco? Simple enough. Am I okay to switch to Deco? You're going to look at the mod of that tank, and the mod is going to be 100 feet. We're at 21 feet. You're going to look at that mod, and you're going to check your depth gauge as well, and you're going to say, you're going to give me back, you're okay to switch to Deco. Once you get the okay, then you can pull that out, charge it, put it in your mouth, clear it, and begin to breathe. But the key to this is you're both doing the same thing at the same time. Mike, you and I are a buddy team now, right? Once we get to our Deco stop, we're both going to pull that tank off. We're both going to look at our mod. We're both going to check our depth to make sure we're both okay. We're both going to go, am I okay to switch to Deco? I'm going to look at yours. I'm going to check my depth. You're going to look at mine. You're going to check your depth. And then you're both at about the same time. You're going to look at each other. You're okay to switch to Deco. Go. We're going to switch, turn on, blow, and go. That's a skill. I need to see you guys stop, check your mod, check your depth, ask your buddy. He'll check your mod, he'll check your depth, and tell you that it's okay to switch to Deco. Now, honestly, in training, that's a lot more than you need to do. But that's the procedure for training.
Once I've got a question. You said the first step is to unhook the bottom bolt snap.
Correct.
Is there a point in that procedure, officially speaking, where you're supposed to reattach?
Yes, absolutely. Once you've got done and you're breathing on this, and you're comfortable, you're at your Deco stop. You're at that key point of just relaxing and hover. Go ahead and just reclip it right then. You've got all the time in the world to do it. Your Deco stop's not going to be shorter than 3 minutes at this point. So you've got 3 to 5 minutes to stop and re-secure your bottom bolt snap. But you don't need to ask permission. You're not in a time crunch where we're at Deco stop and it's time to switch. Take your time, reclip yourself up. If you don't, it's not going to be the end of the world. You're still clipped at your top D ring.
Yeah. Can I review that with you just so I can make sure I got it right?
Absolutely. You want to go to camera?
Oh, sure. So what I wrote down is the first one is you unhook the bottom bolt snap, then you move it out so you can swing it out so you can read and check the maximum operating depth. Then you check your computer depth, and then buddies ask the other, "Am I okay to switch Deco?"
Show me the signs.
Am I okay switch Deco?
Yep.
Or do you do the Deco and then the switch?
Nope.
Okay.
As long as remember, it's like saying a sentence. Am I
Yeah.
okay to switch to Deco? You can certainly say, am I okay to Deco switch? It makes sense, but keep Deco as your last is generally the easiest way to go.
Right. And then after that, so I know the depth because I'm looking at my computer and I can see his maximum operating depth. And if it's fine, then I say, and buddies respond to each other, you okay, switch, Deco.
Correct.
Then we know that it's okay, that we can start breathing it. So you then open the valve, do a quick purge with it still in the water, so not in our mouth, validate that it is functioning. Then we do the regulator switch, purge it once again, make sure the little bit of water that's in there. And then when we know we've been breathing fine, we have a few good breaths, it's going well, then we clip it to the bottom bolt snap.
Absolutely. I can tell you in practical application, the book will tell you to do a purge check. I disagree with that, and here's why. Is a lot of times you'll be in colder water, and that's a good way to freeze your regulator open, and you're causing yourself more problems than not. So I disagree with the pre-check on that. You will know very quickly once you put that in your mouth, do a quick purge, an oral purge, and then a breath, if that thing is working or not. If it is not working, you'll figure it out pretty dang quick. And you still have your other regulator that you can absolutely go back to. If it's not working, oh crap, it's not working. Just go to my other regulator, quick purge on that and go back. But in practical application, I disagree with the idea, especially diving the Northwest. I can see how that'd be okay in salt water and warm 80-degree water where I'm not worried about it freezing open. But being that we dive so much at cold, I disagree with a pre-check a lot. So that's my reasoning behind it. I know the books. I know what the book says. But from practical application, I think you're better off skipping that one step and just doing a physical check. You'll figure it out pretty quick. And if you're a calm diver and in a situation, you'll have the other regulator right there anyway. Oh, didn't work. And go to my primary. But again, remember, everything with this is all conversation, right? And what it'll happen is as you dive with your buddy long enough, you'll stop, you'll look at it. Am I okay for Deco? Yeah, you're okay for Deco. Am I okay for Deco? Yep, you're okay for Deco. And you'll go through it pretty quickly. For the purpose of class, we go very slowly. Am I okay to switch to Deco? I can tell you with Nikki and I diving in Deco, I don't ask her to, I skip the switch portion of that. I just ask, am I okay for Deco? Or I'll just look at her and say, Deco me? She's like, yeah, you're good. And I'll give her your Deco. Yeah, good. So we shorthand a lot of stuff. For now, I'd like you guys to practice the longhand version of it as you dive enough with another diver. If you go back to diving with somebody you don't know, absolutely positively longhand it. Here's a perfect example. I was doing a deep dive class last summer with a diver, and we got to about the 60-foot mark, and we were doing some skills, and I asked him, where you out of gas? And he said, he said 1,000. And I'm like, no, I take that back. He said 700. There we go. There's how the story goes. He looked at me, says, gas 700. And I'm like, we'd only been down for like 15 minutes and I couldn't understand how he's at 700. So I immediately said, okay, we're done. We're going up. We went up the shelf. We did our quick Deco stop, got to the surface. And he says, okay, where are you at on gas? I was very worried, right? And he looked at me and says, I'm at 2,500. And I'm like, wait a minute. How are you at 25 freaking hundred? You told me you were at 700 when you were down there. He says, oh, I was shorthanding. I figured you knew I had 2,000 already. So I just told you, I thought you just pick up that I was at 2,700. It doesn't work that way. Sorry, guys.
Oh, gosh.
Please don't shorthand with things like that. And unless you're absolutely positively 1,010% sure that there's not going to be a misinterpretation of your shorthand. With things like, am I okay for Deco with my wife? We've got that. If she asks me where I'm at on gas, I'm always 2,700. There's no question. So some things you shorthand, some things you won't, but make sure you're with a strong dive buddy that you dove a lot with before you even think about shorthanding. So to your advantage overall. But that's the process. It's not rocket science, right? The idea is I want to verify what gas I'm getting ready to put into my body. And I'd like a second confirmation of that, because if I'm doing 100% gas switch and I'm running multiple Deco bottles, and my Deco bottle is 60 and my other Deco bottle is 100, I definitely don't want to switch to my 100% at 60 feet. I'm asking for some major problems. So where this comes really important is to practice it and good at it here, because the things we're building now are the things we're going to build and use a lot of later on. Make sense, guys?
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to save this one for later. Matt, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to do your class on Wednesday. I'm going to take some notes here. Let's see. We're on Death by PowerPoint slide 518,922. 129 is we're going to pick up on there. But I want to go into dive planning a little bit. So between now and Wednesday, I would like you all to download a piece of software called Subsurface. Good news, it is free. Bad news, it does not have an app that which you can do dive planning on. So those are the good and bad news. It looks like this. This is Subsurface. So as we go through, you guys will need to do a dive plan. Because this is just a Deco procedures class, I'm going to go through and we're going to talk about how to do that dive plan.
Can we get like a 5-minute break really quick?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay.
5-minute break.
You still out there?
Was that Mike?
I said, are you still out there?
I am. I just stepped outside for just a second, but I'm right here.
Turns out I actually have Subsurface on my phone. I just haven't ever used it.
Unfortunately, you won't be able to do dive planning on your phone with Subsurface. You'll actually have to use a computer.
Well, that could be problematic, but let's see if this thing will do it.
All right, I'm back.
All right. So this is Subsurface, and this is what it's going to look like on PC or Mac. Once you launch it, we're going to go to Log and Plan Dive. Once we're in Plan Dive, we can start building up a dive plan based upon what we're getting ready to do. A few things we want to start with. Upper left-hand corner, we want to start with altitude. We're going to be diving at a 5,000-foot elevation, okay? Once we have that, we're able to determine we're diving freshwater. It's right up here. And then we determine what kind of tanks we're going to be using. Are we using aluminum 80s? What are we doing? There's a teardown window for just about every kind of tank that you're going to be using. We'll just plan for aluminum 80s right here. Overall, what's our starting pressure? I would highly doubt. Let's see. Let's put it over to aluminum 80. Sorry, there we go. So we're starting with 3,000, and we're starting with 21% oxygen, 0% helium. You guys are not ready for that. And then we're going to plan our dive. So simple enough. Our first dive is going to be 70 feet. As you can see over on the right-hand side, it gives us a visual graphic representation of what that looks like. We know we're not going to drop in 1 minute. So to get out to 70 feet, let's see, there we go. We're going to take 4 minutes to get there. That's going to make our new run time 4 minutes. Run time is the total amount of the dive. All right, we're going to stay at 70 feet for 20 minutes. It's our run time, 24 minutes. Now, a couple of things about down here. I want you guys to be using...
Sorry, why do you have two of them set for 70 feet for different times?
Because the first one is my arrival at 70 feet. The second one is when I leave 70 feet. I'm going down. I'm taking 4 minutes to get to 70 feet. I'm staying at 70 feet for 20 minutes. And at 20 minutes, I'm leaving. So if you look at the visual representation over here, I'm coming down to 70 feet. There's my first marker point on the graph. I'm staying at 70 feet for 20 minutes, my next point on the graph. Does that make sense now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take that off. That makes it a little easier for you guys to see. There we go. So that's where I'm staying down. And I can do multiple point dives on this as well. I can add additional points. So for example, say I want to come to 50 feet, stay at 50 feet. I can build a multi-point dive, but I want to stay at 70 feet, come to 50 feet, and stay at 50 feet. So I can add multiple points in the dive. So for right now, we're going to keep it simple, stupid, right? The other thing I want you guys to do, and I'd really like it if you took notes on this, I want you guys to keep your gradient factors at 2550. When you set your computers, please set your computers to 2550 for me, please, if you would, pretty please. Our actual dive planning will be much less conservative than that, but at least for right now, it gives you a very quick representation of what happens. Now, as we start looking at this, it gives us a complete dive plan. If we start our depth at 70 feet for 4 minutes, or it takes 4 minutes to get to 70 feet, we level off at 20 minutes at 70 feet. What we're going to need to do is we're going to do a ascent to 30 feet. We're going to remain. It's going to take us 1 minute to get to 30 feet. From there, at 30 feet, we're going to remain for 1 minute of decompression time. We're going to ascend to 20 feet from 30 feet, and we're going to remain at 20 feet for 22 minutes before we're finally able to ascend, okay? Now, you guys are learning to be decompression divers. So let's find out, if we will, what happens if we have a decompression blend. So we're using a aluminum 40 at 40% nitrox. Anybody notice something major just happened when I added a decompression blend to 40%? Mike, what just happened?
Our deco time went from 22 minutes to 9 minutes.
That's fairly significant, wouldn't you think?
Yep.
Absolutely. So that's what accelerated decompression looks like. So you guys are learning to use a higher blend decompression mix so that you can enter into accelerated decompression. Really quickly, you just saw a very quick sample of what that looked like. Without a decompression blend, this is a 49-minute dive. With a decompression blend of 40%, we'll go ahead and put 3,000 PSI in there as well. All of a sudden, we go from a 48-minute dive to a 36-minute dive. We just lost 12 minutes of required time. Is that a big deal?
Yes.
Absolutely. Because typically what happens is if you're doing a decompression dive in the ocean, you're going to come up to that 20 feet in the middle of the freaking wild blue, looking at the surface from 20 feet down. And I'm telling you, 9 minutes is a long time to sit and float on a line or in the ocean, waiting to be able to come to the surface. So accelerated decompression time is definitely to your advantage. And you can see on this visual representation chart that it changed its dynamic as well. Now, here's the bad news for you guys is with this Deco class, I'm only certifying you to be able to use up to 40% nitrox as a decompression blend and up to 5 minutes of decompression. So as we have this dive, as it sits right now, could you guys do this dive?
No.
Absolutely not. It's too long a deco. So something needs to change. Mike, what's the easiest thing to change on this dive to be able to reduce that 9 minutes of deco?
Shorten the time at depth.
Absolutely. So what happens if we go to 18 minutes? What happens if we go to 16 minutes? Here we go.
Right.
So simple enough, we shorten the amount of time. Easy enough. So we can do one of two things in this is we can either shorten the time or shallow up the depth. So what if we wanted to stay 20 minutes at that depth? What happens if we do 60 feet instead? Is that fairly impressive? We just lost 4 minutes of deco based upon a 10-foot change. So one of the things I want you guys to think about in emergency situation, something happens. Mike, you've been through my stress and rescue class. What does gas equivalent to when you're talking about an emergency situation?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. What does gas equivalent to?
I'll go and give you the answer on this. It's getting late. I get it. As you look at it, gas equals time. If you have an emergency situation and you check your gas, that determines how much time you have to make a decision on anything. Fair enough? More gas means more time?
Right.
Easy enough. Another thing that we're getting into challenges with is you start getting into deco. Shallowness gives you time as well. So if you guys are getting to that point and you look at your computer and you see that it's clicking up that you have 4 minutes of decompression time, what happens if you take time and you raise 10 feet in the water column? You gain time, right? You reduce the amount of deco that you're going to be needing, and all of a sudden now you have more time to make a decision. In this particular case, right now we're showing 5 minutes of deco. What happens if we took that same thing? We came up 10 feet in the water column. All of a sudden we have no deco time. All we did is come up 10 feet. We started out with 70 feet of depth, and we had 9 minutes of decompression time. We came up 20 feet on that, 50 feet. All of a sudden we lost by coming up 20 feet, we lost 9 minutes of decompression time. So as you start entering that deco required time, that decompression obligation, that's what we call it, is a decompression obligation, because like anything, if you play the game, you got to pay the price, right? You want to go out and have relations with a whole bunch of girls on the side. You take the price of potentially getting an STD or having a baby, right? You get really rip roaring drunk one night. You pay the price with a hangover the next day. Everything has a price, right? So the deeper you go, the bigger the price, right? You can minimize that price by coming up in the water column just a little bit, right? So as you guys go through and play with this, I'd like you guys to play with it at Boltzmann factor of 2550 with a bottom partial pressure of 1.4 and a deco partial pressure of 1.4, please, if you wouldn't mind. You guys think you can do that?
Sorry, say those again. There's the gradient factor is 2550, and then I'm trying to find, and then the bottom PO2 is 1.4.
1.4. It's right over here on the right-hand side in this gas.
And the Deco PO2 also to 1.4.
Correct. If you'd like, now would be a really good time to screenshot this and play with it. What I'd like you guys to do is I'd like you guys to plan for me and have this ready. I would like a 70-foot dive for 20 minutes. But what about a contingency? Matt, should we plan a contingency if something happens?
Absolutely. The 5x5, right? Isn't that what?
Absolutely. Oh, good job. Look at you go. I like it. So what happens if, so we're doing my 70-foot dive. What happens if I go 5 feet deeper? What does that dive plan look like? Well, all of a sudden it went up several minutes. So we went from, we have 70 and 70. We've got a 9-minute decompression obligation for a 36-minute total dive. So I'm going to write that down. 9 minutes of deco with 36 minutes runtime. So if we stayed we went down 5 feet deeper, 75, 75, all of a sudden we gained 3 minutes of total time and 3 minutes of decompression time. Why would that be important, Matt?
Well, sometimes things happen and you may not be quite as diligent on staring at your computer and your depth, and so, or your buoyancy could be off just slightly, so you went a little bit deeper, and so you say, well, if I'm not as diligent as I probably should have been, then maybe I should plan for, like you said, a bad situation, or a less than ideal situation.
Absolutely. So I'll be able to plan my gas management accordingly, right?
Correct.
Exactly. So because I want to make it back to the surface. Now, what happens if I decided to say 5 minutes longer? So all of a sudden, 5 minutes longer at 5 feet deeper took us from a 36-minute dive with 9 minutes of deco to a 52-minute dive with 19 minutes of deco. That could be a problem. So here's what I want you guys to plan out. I want you to plan a 70-foot dive. I want you guys to use the gradient factor you're seeing here, and I want you to play with it. I wanted a 5 but I want you to plan it for 15 minutes of bottom time. And then I want you to plan the same dive with 5 feet deeper, and then the same dive with 5 feet deeper and 5 minutes longer. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
How is it? Where do you? So on your second tank there, you have it set at 40% O2. Is there some place where you tell it to switch over to that? Because
it'll automatically figure out the best switch point for you automatically. And where it's telling you to switch right here.
Well, because I've got one, and I've got it set with aluminum 40 at 40%, but it's not. There's nothing saying, okay, hey, here's where you switch. Like I can't.
It's based on the partial pressure. So if we reset our deco partial pressure to 1.0, you can see really quickly that it does. It's forcing a switch at 30 feet. See that right there?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I don't know if it's that, because it's just not automatically saying to switch over to that on my side.
Let's show your screen.
So Matt, look right here. Look what I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
I
I see that. It's just that there's nothing telling it to switch over. I can see
it is. It's right here.
On my side.
Okay, that's because you need to change the bottom partial pressure and the deco partial pressure of oxygen to 1.0. That's what's happening, is you're not changing the partial pressure, because remember, you can breathe 40% nitrox at 75 feet. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it's still not doing that. I wonder if I had some other setting to not use.
Go ahead and share your screen with me. Let's see.
Now, Benjamin, since I'm going to be in side mount, I'm not going to be carrying a pony bottle, correct?
You're not. You're going to do all this, and I just need to see you switch back and forth between primary and secondary because you're in the XR course. You're doing things just a little differently.
Okay.
I just see you switch between you and Dustin. Won't be worrying about a deco mix. You'll just be worrying about a simple switch, and you'll be an actual graded factor.
Using the gradient at the 2550, right?
I'm going to have you guys use 5085.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I can discuss that when you get to your house.
Yep. Yeah, you and Matt are going to be doing, or not Matt. You and Dustin will be doing a little bit different because you're doing a little bit different course.
Sounds good.
Matt, whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your screen.
While he's doing that, would you tell me again what plans you want us to do for depth and time?
I want to do a 70 feet for 15 minutes, 75 feet for 15 minutes.
Slow, son. I don't write that fast. 70 feet for how long? 15 minutes?
15 minutes, huh?
Okay. 75 feet?
For 15 minutes.
Okay.
And 75 feet for 20 minutes.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see my screen, but
oh, there it is. And Mike, if you'd like, you can show up at the dive shop tomorrow at 5:30, and we'll go through this together if you'd like.
I just figured out what it was.
Oh, good.
My aluminum 40 was set at 21% oxygen, and so there's no reason to switch. So
gotcha.
Yep.
There you go. Easy enough. You found it. So I want you and go through and play with this. I want you guys to play with the software. The best thing you can possibly do is play with it. We're going to be doing an actual dive plan. Since there's 3 of you, I'm going to have each one of you actually build one dive plan, and we'll have that ready to go. You all will also need a slate. Does everybody have a wrist slate?
I do.
Does it need to be a wrist slate?
Wrist slate's best, but you can have a clip slate too, if you need.
I believe I have a clip slate. I don't think I have
Alexa,
a wrist one.
Working on 40%. There we go. Oh, perfect. So everybody needs a slate. Now, here's my trick with slates. Go to the Home Depot, and they sell white duct tape. Take that white duct tape and put a piece of it on, and put it over on your slate, and write on the duct tape. When you're done with the duct tape or that dive plan, you just tear it off. You don't actually have to erase your dive slate. That's what I would do, and that's what I actually do use. It has been the absolute best. So that way you don't have to keep writing and erasing and writing and erasing and writing and erasing.
So I don't know if you've found a really good way of erasing dive slates, but a magic eraser works the best.
It does work the best, but it's not perfect. The absolute perfect is rip a piece of duct tape off and throw it in the trash.
Yeah, there's that too. But
and I promise you, it's a heck of a lot faster because I use a permanent marker to write on it. For a long time, Nikki used pink duct tape and I used yellow duct tape, but I couldn't find yellow duct tape for this after I ran out of my last roll of it. So I went to white duct tape.
Yellow's nuclear grade, man.
Absolutely. I haven't been able to find a fresh roll of the fluorescent yellow duct tape. I can't remember where I bought the last one. I think I bought the last one at Walmart. But so the last one this one I just bought. I bought a roll of white, but the roll of white works perfectly. I took a couple strips and I put it over on my slates. Good to go. Good to go. It's nice, fast, easy. No fuss, no muss. So
cool. I have white duct tape, so that'll work out well.
There you go. Perfect. Well, perfect, guys. We went through a lot tonight. I want you guys to really play with the dive planning software. It's going to be to your advantage to understand that and play with it. On Wednesday night, we will be going through dive plans. We will be I will be having the opportunity to listen to Matt. He was the only one that didn't get to. And if Dustin or Don show up, they will have the opportunity to present as well. Let's see. Let me go through my notes here real quick. Just take me a second to click that. Bring that.
Are we at Dive Pirates on Wednesday then?
Negative. We are virtual. I will be at Dive Pirates tomorrow, and I will be happy to meet you there a half hour early before my dive class and do a little dive planning with you if you'd like.
That would be cool. What time did you say?
5:30.
5:30.
Yes, sir.
All right.
On
and
Wednesday,
I vacuumed the pool out really good today, so it should be halfway decent for you guys tomorrow.
Nice. So today we went through, let's see, I believe we already talked about safety stops on Monday. We went through hypothermia basics. We went through tank sizes. We discussed the value of and understanding cylinder sizes and how to build cylinders, as well as we did some dive planning tonight as well. On Wednesday, we're going to be doing some SAC rate calculations. How to do an actual SAC rate calculation and what that actually looks like, and how to build turn times based upon that. So that'll be very exciting. We're going to go over some more dive planning as well, and we should be pretty good to go. I've tried to keep this class fairly simple. I have the preponderance to go a little more complex. What questions do you guys have at this point?
Benjamin, this is more like for me. Am I using your Steel 100s again?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, my questions are about the gear specifically. So, should we plan to use your tanks? Should we bring some of our own? I mean, I've got two aluminum 100s, also quite heavy, and some and an aluminum 80. I don't have, like I said before, I don't have a Deco computer, a Shearwater or a DSX or anything like that. And so,
Gotcha. I have an extra Perdix that I can lend you for this course. So that's not a problem, and I can show you how to use it on site. Not a hard thing. Let's see. Mike, you have a DSX. We'll go through that with you. Dave, you have a Perdix, so that should be good to go.
Yep.
I have both. I've got Perdix and DSX, so it's not a big stress for me. But let's see. That's a good question. Dave will be in side mount. He's doing things a little differently. Mike, you'll be in back mount. You'll need to come up with a pony bottle. Do you have did the Dive Pirates able to come up with a pony bottle for you?
Yeah, Brett's going to loan me his. What
Perfect.
size? That brings a question though. What's the standard or the normal size for one of those for what we're doing?
Typically 30 cubic feet is about right. Brett's been moving over to those HP 40s. I'm not a big fan. I don't like how they set. They're kind of short and squat, and I'm just not a big fan of the lack of sexiness to them. If nothing else, they just don't look comfortable. I typically either dive a aluminum 30 or aluminum 40 or aluminum 50. Those are my three favorites because they're long and slender and they tend to tuck really nicely. Everything's going to be purpose built though. It depends upon what kind of dive you're doing. If you're doing side mount, an aluminum 40 is about the absolute best Deco bottle you can get. Followed by an aluminum 50. Aluminum 30 is really small and just not as useful as it could be. So for a pony bottle, aluminum 30 is perfect. It's a great little bottle. It's lean. It's tight. It tightens in really nicely. So
since we're limited to 5-minute deco stops, a 50 is overkill, and
it is.
I'm not going to be doing side mount. I'll be doing
so aluminum 30 or aluminum 30 or aluminum 40 would be your best.
Okay.
He has those aluminum or those HP 40s. It's a nice little bottle. It's an HP. It holds a crap load of air. I don't like how it trims. It's not my favorite. But some of it comes down to personal preference. Some of it just comes down to kind of common across the board. Is he loading you a reg with an SPG on it as well?
I believe so.
Okay, perfect. So there we go. So Matt, do you have what pony bottle do you have?
I've got an aluminum 40.
Perfect.
And right now the regs that I have are yoke, which, I don't. I guess I don't have to be as comfortable as you could possibly be like with a din, but like I said, I do plan on getting them
Sure.
starting next month.
Yep. So if you could bring 2 back mount tanks and your pony bottle, you'll be perfect. And I'll loan you. You'll need some sort of SPG and way to monitor gas, and I'll loan you a Perdix for your live computer.
Yeah, I've got the SPGs. So I would only need 2 tanks if we're doing 3 dives, 70, 90, and 110. Is it?
If you need with your aluminum hundreds, you should be able to get 2 dives out of one of them and 1 dive out of the last.
Okay, that's because we're going shorter.
Yeah, we're only doing.
Just because I'm just thinking about how much I would end up using at 70 feet. Obviously, it's not as much as at 90, but it is a good deal more than.
Sure.
I guess I'd have to make sure. Well, we can figure that out on Wednesday, right? If the gas
Exactly. We're going to do some gas planning management, but you should be good to go, but we'll take a look at it. If you can come up with 3 tanks, it's probably not a bad plan to bring 3 tanks, 1 for each dive.
Yeah, I have 3 tanks. I have an 80 and 2 100s.
Perfect. Bring them all 3. You'll be good to go. Easy enough. And then Mike, if you can come up with 3 tanks and 1 pony, you'll be good to go. Because you're most likely using aluminum 80s would be my guess.
I'm using aluminum 80s, and I should have plenty of tanks.
Cool. Awesome. Perfect. All right, guys. Any more questions?
Nope.
Awesome.
Have a good night.
I will see you at 7 o'clock on Wednesday on virtually.
Yep. Talk to you Wednesday.
Hopefully I will see you Tuesday.